So Dragon Age Origins releases, right? The reception is monumental. Basically a strong 8 out of 10 to a light 9 out of 10 across the board. The story was applauded for being traditional fantasy that led into deep and rich lore that was further enhanced by stellar voice acting and world building. Players and reviewers felt a strong connection to creating a warden that could feel like an extension of themselves or a character that they created. Combat was a little more mixed, but still generally positive. Those who had experience with BioWare's brand of combat would instantly feel at home with Dragon Age Origins' slower and more strategic fighting system. But those who were jumping in with a controller on a console had a more frustrating time overall. The biggest point of critique were the graphics, which were a bit more on the mid-level for something that came out in 2009. That said, the game took 7 years to create, and you can really see that in the length and the amount of detail that was weaved into it. So what lesson have we learned from all of this? Obviously, if you take a semi-lengthy development time and combine it with the passion that it takes to... So anyways, EA gave BioWare 14 to 16 months to make Dragon Age 2, and BioWare decided to make sure to completely overhaul the combat and graphics with a large chunk of that time. And that's how modern video game development was born. What's funny is that I was still in that age range where I was completely wowed by the new graphics and shiny, fast-paced combat systems. So when I saw the trailer for Dragon Age 2, I got so excited that I watched it about 20 different times on YouTube before pre-ordering the thing like my life depended on it. I was literally the target demographic for these latest overhauls. And you know what? I liked the game. My only complaint at the time was that everywhere I went felt the same, but it didn't stop me from enjoying my time with Dragon Age 2. Still, I never touched it again, and when I thought about the game later in life, I always remembered those really samey looking maps that were drilled into my mind by their repetition. So in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at Dragon Age 2's mechanics, writing, characters, and overall design and see what was done right and what could have been done better. Before I begin, I'll note that I'm currently streaming Fallout 76 for charity over on my Twitch channel if you want to pop by or donate. I've got some limited time stickers which I'll be donating the proceeds of at the end of the month if you want to get your hands on those. And finally, my wife and I started a cooking channel that has nothing to do with gaming. But feel free to check that out if you want to. So right out of the gate, the game has a plethora of DLC, pre-order content, and bonus downloads that the main menu really wants you to know about, which is par for the course for an EA-published game. I'm all for the occasional crossover when that crossover makes sense, but holy hell. Pre-ordering the Signature Edition got you 5 pieces of exclusive gear. Pre-ordering through Best Buy got you an amulet. If you went through the EA or BioWare store, you got a belt. Several other retailers had some random items to give out. If you owned Dead Space 2, you got Isaac Clarke's armor for some reason. If you played the Dragon Age Facebook game, you could nab a few items. If you went to fucking San Diego Comic-Con and shook down a BioWare employee named Chris Priestley, he would throw exclusive items at you like an IRL loot goblin. Thankfully, all of this random stuff just comes with the Ultimate Edition, but these non-stop exclusives really were at the height of their popularity right around when this game was released. Either way, let's actually get into the setup for Dragon Age 2. So first things first, there's only one character background in this game, and that was probably one of the biggest slaps to the face to fans of Origins. Like the game's namesake implied, Origins was particularly adept at letting players choose their background, race, and personality for their warden. It lent a heap of replayability to the game just by starting it up. Dragon Age 2, on the other hand, has you piloting a character named Hawk, who's a fully voiced human male or female that you get little to no choice in creating beyond choosing their class and later their appearance. In this case, we've got Mage, Rogue, or Warrior as far as classes go. The game kicks off with a dwarf named Varric being interrogated by a Seeker of the Chantry. Varric is told to tell her everything that he knows about Hawk, starting from the beginning, which leads into our introduction of Hawk and his cleavage-wielding female companion. After smiting a few Darkspawn, the game actually gets right into the combat tutorial. I actually initially disliked this intro a lot because I felt like it was too much of a cool guy action hero sort of opening scene. But what's funny about this whole thing is that it's being portrayed this way because Varric is intentionally embellishing extra details such as the size of your companion's boobs, which are later revealed to be a size or two smaller. So all of this anime intro is due to the dwarf's version of the events, which I thought was kind of funny. The combat is 1000% more flashy than Origins though, and I actually like how it looks. This is one of the big things that the devs focused on when creating this game, so it makes complete sense that it feels good to slice, chop, and maim Darkspawn like an absolute machine. The combat mechanics are definitely tailored more towards console players, and I immediately picked up my controller to try to use it instead. Unfortunately, there isn't any native controller support for the PC version of Dragon Age 2, and while I'm sure that there are likely mods that exist to support a controller, I decided to tough it out and stick to the keyboard and mouse. It's definitely not a terrible way to play the game, and is a little reminiscent of older BioWare titles. It's a little bit like an MMO actually, which might explain why Inquisition went the way that it did. Basically, you still click on enemies like you would in Origins. Your guy doesn't really move to the next enemy automatically, and instead will just stand there unless you click on someone else or hit the next enemy key. For a rogue or warrior, this means that I spam the next enemy key and watch as Hawk runs around automatically. I'll occasionally press my abilities when they come off of cooldown, and that's all combat is for me. I will say that a mage would get a lot more out of this system, and I do feel like that's the way to go to enjoy it as best you can. After taking down an ogre, Varric is told to cut the crap and the over-exaggerations before he launches into Hawk's story from the very beginning, which leads into our appearance editor for Hawk. It's odd because you've definitely seen what BioWare had in mind for the main character, so it feels strange to then take him or her and then turn them blonde or change the skin tone or the like. You can't even tweak Hawk's default face to be a little different while still retaining most of his features, which is really odd and feels like an OC do not steal moment from the devs. And ultimately, even though I took the time to create my guy the way that I would have normally created him, I just didn't feel any attachment to him because I know that I'll be playing the role of a pre-made character that I had nothing to do with. So I guess I'm sticking to the default Hawk for my playthrough. From here, the game allows you to import your Dragon Age Origins save, which doesn't really actually have too much effect on this game overall. A cinematic then plays which recaps the very basic events of the start of the previous entry. Basically, our guy is from Lothering, which was sacked by the Darkspawn pretty early on during these events. Escaping into the wilds, Hawk leads the way along with his mother and his younger siblings. The level system is introduced immediately, so we may as well get that out of the way now. As you might have guessed, a lot of the more pen and paper vibe from Origins has been replaced. Instead, we have an alternative that I'm not that opposed to actually. You still have the same attributes as before, though Constitution isn't as useless as it was. Skills have been yeeted out the window and talents are your only leveling choice now. But those talents are spread into several trees that you can choose from immediately. Rogues can spec into archery, dual weapons, scoundrel talents, and so on. Mages can pick between schools of spells like elemental, primal, arcane, and so on. And warriors have their usual talents such as two-handed, sword and shield, defender, and so on. For rogues and warriors, things are more or less business as usual, but mages in particular seem to suffer in terms of the amount of decisions that you have compared to the previous game. Here's a brief example that extends to pretty much every other spell school to some degree. So in Origins, say you want to go with a full-blown elemental mage. This would have you choosing the primal spell school. You have 4 types of fire spells, 4 earth spells, 4 lightning, and 4 ice, all in a single school. Now let's say you want to do that in Dragon Age 2. You've got 2 fire and 2 ice spells in the elemental tree, and you've got 3 earth spells and 2 lightning spells in the primal tree. There are some supplementary passives as well that boost these elements and the like, but in terms of the spells that you can cast, you've got 7 less spells over 1 more skill tree. Which is kind of sad, and I'm not even a particularly magey player. I'm not saying that mages are bad in the second game or that they can't still do what they were made to do, but the absolute best part about Origins magic was the sheer variety involved in creating a spellcaster. And seeing that get boiled down really only points towards the beginning of an ongoing problem with magic in a lot of modern AAA RPGs. There are class specializations like the previous game, of which you get to choose 2 of. There are unfortunately only 3 per class though, down from the 6 per class with Origins DLC. This is particularly unfortunate as some of my favorite and more unique specializations have been cut, such as Bard, Shapeshifter, Arcane Warrior, and Legionnaire Scout. These specs made for some really fun class combos that added to the amount of replayability that you could squeeze out of Origins. And I think that 2 really suffers from a lot of your builds looking the same. This is even more true of your companions, which only gain 1 specialization each throughout the game, further stunting the potential for cool and unique builds. Continuing on through our escape from Lothering has us encountering a Templar and his wife, who point out that Hawk's mother is an apostate or an unregulated mage for those who don't remember. Templars tend to hunt these fellers down typically, so the battered Templar immediately tries to arrest her before giving up as his wife convinces him that we've saved them. This whole sequence gives you a bigger taste of the dialogue system, which has now been dumbed down to the modern BioWare wheel that we all know and love. As always with this type of dialogue tree, not knowing what my guy's going to say exactly sometimes has him saying shit that I didn't want him to. But I guess that's just industry standard at this point. We all know that reading is hard, so it's better to have a fun little surprise mechanic in my dialogue options rather than having to slog through all of those miserable letters. I gotta say that it's still annoying as always to have Hawk saying something that I didn't think that he would, and having players respond to him as if he had said something completely differently though.
Tell me, have you never wanted to return to Ferelden?
I grew up in Ferelden. It will always be my home.
The Blight is over. You could rebuild what you lost. Do you truly not want to?
The dialogue system has also gone from needing to rely on horribly confusing mechanics like persuasion and cunning, and now just has Mass Effect's Code Red and Baja Blast flavored responses pouring out of Hawk. I'm not gonna bother getting too much into our not Paragon and not Renegade dialogue options here just because I'm tired of exploring the idea that my BioWare character can be nice and righteous or mean and aggressive. But the basics are as follows. Companions can be pushed to be friends or rivals with Hawk depending on his answers. The dialogue wheel can encompass diplomatic, helpful, charming, sarcastic, and aggressive answers, all of which affect how people view Hawk in a given situation. If you choose enough aggressive options, Hawk will have moments where he can choose a special option that is reserved only for aggressive Hawks. The same applies to sarcastic and diplomatic, which does help to keep things a little fresh. Though all of that said, Hawk doesn't have an obvious meter in the pause menu dictating people's perception of him like Shepard does. Regardless, the core ideas of this whole system are more or less the same here. Anyways, Hawk's younger brother dies. Yeah, he took an ogre straight to the torso area. If you're a mage, he doesn't die here, but your sister does. And while I don't really care because I don't have any attachment to the guy at this stage, I will say that it does set up some character development for the remaining sibling later. After avenging him and laying him to rest, more spawns start lumbering in to finish the job. Of course, what would Dragon Age be without dragons? Or age, really. Fortunately, the dragon here is none other than Morrigan's mother, who fulfills both of these descriptors effortlessly, and seems to have a proclivity for saving main characters in these games. I do have to say though that the pacing of this entry is wild when compared to Origins. I mean, you have to really scrap your way through the lowliest of Darkspawn in the first game before eventually making it to the first ogre several hours later, which then grinds you into a pulp with no issue. Meanwhile, I'm already level 3 after about 20 minutes of gameplay, and taking down ogres is almost trivial. So Gilf Central over here offers us a way out of Dodge if we agree to deliver an amulet for her to a Dalish camp near the city that we're trying to get to. Meanwhile, that Templar isn't looking so good and is definitely showing signs of dark spawnification. So his wife Aveline pushes a dagger through his plate mail with her monstrous biceps. This one's a bit more sad, I guess. But yeah, I still have no attachment to these people besides from a previous playthrough. After all is said and done, we get ported off to a coastal town before taking a ship to the city of Kirkwall. This is where the entire game is going to be taking place more or less, so get used to looking at it. Kirkwall is a city-state that more or less commands the Free Marches, north of where the last game took place. The city was renowned for its slave trade for a very long time before being declared as a free city. Though that's more of a technical term here, seeing as this place is very much still a corrupt shithole for lack of a better descriptor. There's an entire history here revolving around several major events including a slave uprising, bouts of anarchy, seizure by the Kunari, liberation by the Orlesians, more rebellion, power shifting towards a group of thugs who then tried to expel the Templars from the city, and the Templars regaining control of Kirkwall after arresting the thugs. It's actually pretty fascinating stuff to read, though a lot of it does require codex exploration and background reading to figure out, and isn't always immediately made apparent through Hawk's experiences throughout the game. Our first order of business is getting into the city, which is actively barring entry from those affected by the destruction of the Blight. What's weird is that there's a mob of people out front all yelling at the guards who seem to be walling them off from proceeding further. But after talking to the main guy in front, he's like, alright, head on in and talk to the captain. So apparently refugees can walk past the guard, but have just taken to screaming instead. After waiting around for 3 days, Hawk's uncle strolls out to greet the party, before telling them that he's broke as hell and owes a huge debt. So in order to bribe our way into the city, Hawk has to choose whether to work for a group of mercenaries or smugglers for the next year. This decision hardly matters at all, and I wouldn't even really count it towards the replayability factor, seeing as both choices are made and concluded in this very courtyard. But I did wind up going with the smugglers since I chose the mercs last time, doesn't really matter. Now the game opens up a little more, as a cutscene depicts what happens in the year after our arrival. These cutscenes are actually really nicely done, and further lean into a lot of the stylized cinematics that the previous game brought to the table. By this time, the Warden has defeated the Archdemon, and Hawk has worked his way through the underground to get to a bit more of a comfortable living situation. That said, it's not like him and his sister Bethany are living the high life. While their reputation has been building up, they're still looking for their big break that will hopefully net them a better life in Kirkwall. But most importantly, a large amount of Qunari have made their way into the city after a storm fucked up their fleet of ships. They've currently set up in their own corner of the city, putting a lot of people on edge with their sudden appearance. The Templars who currently control Kirkwall are continuing to crack down on its mages and citizens, creating a mixture of people who are all ready to snap at any given moment.
NPCs in Cyberpunk 2077 will act according to the time of day, meaning that they will have schedules.
This is where Varric is properly introduced to Hawk. The suave surface dwarf is particularly adept at all things that make up a good rogue archer, including fighting, talking, and forming connections. Hawk's current focus is getting into an expedition to the Deep Roads for a chance at striking it rich, despite the fact that the leader of this expedition doesn't want him along for the ride. Varric happens to be this leader's brother, and claims that if we were to approach as a partner and not an underling that we could make it in. This means that we need to raise 50 gold to buy into this expedition, which means that we have to take care of some odd jobs around Kirkwall to get it done. Aveline has been working for the city guard in our year time-lapse, and can be picked up again if I want her tanky ass in my party. I never mentioned this before, but the tactics system from the previous game does make a comeback here, which I'm always grateful for. I won't get into it since it's pretty much the same thing as before, but I figured it was worth pointing out as a big positive for Dragon Age 2 overall. What's not a positive is the armor system, which for some reason does not extend to your allies. This one was always really damn strange to me, since Hawk is the only one that can equip boots, gloves, helmets, and chest pieces, while companions are relegated to pre-made armor sets. Sure, they can still equip different weapons, rings, belts, and amulets, but individual armor pieces are out, which makes me think that the lack of time when creating this game caused this change. That said, this armor system isn't the only overhaul that the second game brings to the table in terms of item management. Health potions are condensed from having different sizes to just being one size that heals you for 60%, though there are other potions that you can make with a recipe or buy outright. You can't learn an herbalism skill and instead just know how to make different potions as long as you have the right recipe. It definitely does make sense to get rid of herbalism considering that you're nearly always in a single city. And I honestly probably used alternate potions more in this game than I did in Origins. Runes, on the other hand, got really dumbed down. There are no longer Grandmaster and Novice runes that you can slot and unslot at will. Instead, you just craft a single-sized rune, take it over to Sandal, who made it to Kirkwall, and then slot it into a weapon or armor piece where it can't be removed, only destroyed and replaced by a different rune. It's not a horrible system, but I don't like the simplification from the previous entry. After picking up Aveline and hitting up my home for all my pre-order bonus gear, I head to one of the few scraps of DLC locations in this game. The Black Emporium is a magic item store that stocks some pretty good stuff throughout it. I'm particularly interested in the potion that lets me respec my characters, seeing as they auto-level themselves when they're away from Hawk. There are 2 real bits of DLC that I'll be hitting towards the end of the game, but everything else beyond those 2 encompass the pre-order gear, a companion, and the Black Emporium. So now that we have the town at our disposal, let's get into side questing and what that looks like. The whole game's quest selection takes place on this map screen here. You can toggle between day, night, and the outskirts of the city. It's all pretty basic and immediately showcases the difference between Origin's sprawling, complex maps and detailed areas and Dragon Age 2's very simple selection screen. The quests themselves break down into the mainline, companions, secondary, side, and rumors. The rumors are basically the setup for what will become quests, and just let the player know what's going on in the background while they take care of other things. I find the rumor system interesting and kind of cool, as it makes sense for Hawk to at least have heard of some of these things going on before actually getting to engage with them. Meanwhile, side quests are the least involved and usually have you just clicking on a thing or a person somewhere in the city for XP, even if there is some kind of light story attached to it.
Did you misplace this?
Bless my fool spirit, I never thought I'd see that again. Thank you.
It is worth noting that walking around at night will have you getting into non-stop encounters with random enemies consisting of slavers, bandits, and whatever other low-life scum that prowls the streets. I generally found these to be really boring and tedious almost instantly, as every fight goes about the same. Fight a wave, reinforcements arrive, fight them, and then move on. It's not a very good system, and it makes whatever destination you get to become that much more annoying when there's a fight there too. Of the notable side quests, one sticks out almost immediately as it leads to your next companion, Fenris. Fenris is an escaped slave who's mired in mystery and seems to be polite but dangerous. He baits you into drawing out some slave hunters who are after him, before thanking you for your service and asking you to accompany him to where his former master is staying in the city. After sweeping a mansion and coming up short, Fenris offers to join you on your upcoming expedition. I like Fenris a lot, but I'll be talking about him more later along with all of the other companion quests in the companion roundup. Our second quest that leads to a companion brings with it one of the few familiar faces in the game. Upon hearing of a healer who patches up and cures Fereldans without asking for a single coin, we drop by a little house in Lowtown where victims of the Blight show up in droves for food, money, healing, and so on. After a bit of prying, we figure out their whereabouts before trotting over to meet up with none other than Anders. Those who have played the Origins DLC or watched some goofy-ass 2-hour and 2-minute video on it will know our mage friend. Currently, he's in the middle of Darktown, resuscitating orphans straight into a set of double D tits, as seems to be the tradition for most women in Dragon Age 2. After he's through with his ritual, Anders senses the midichlorians coursing through Hawk's supple body and gets ready to tear into that ass. Hawk puts his hands up and tells Anders that we just want some information about the Deep Roads from his time when he was a warden, and Anders replies by asking Hawk to help free a mage friend of his who was stationed in the gallows of Kirkwall. This is where one of the big conflicts of the game really starts to take root. You see, with the Templars seizing control of the city, mages have gotten the short end of the stick repeatedly, and it's starting to look a lot worse for them. Anders describes that Circle mages have begun to be locked in cells, refuse their usual rights, and forced to become tranquil. This was something that was touched on a little bit in Origins, but forcing a mage to be tranquil basically cuts them off from the Fade permanently. This process causes the mage to lose their personality and emotions as well, forcing them into a state where everything is matter-of-fact to them. Unfortunately for Anders' friend, the guy has already undergone the Rite of Tranquility, and is being used as a lure to capture Anders. When the Templars reveal themselves, Anders goes Super Saiyan and begins wreaking havoc on the soldiers. I'll explain what exactly happened here later, but the short version is that Anders merged with the Spirit of Justice, who was also an Origins DLC companion. When all is said and done, the power flare from the Anders Justice fusion dance temporarily snaps Anders' friend out of his tranquil state. In his brief bout of regaining consciousness, the friend begs Anders to end his life, which Anders obliges. In the aftermath, our new mage friend offers his services to Hawk after seeing what kind of man he is, which Hawk happily accepts. The last companion pickup that we have going for now is Isabella, who is 100% certified girl boss and showcases her capabilities in her introduction when she's jumped at a bar. After the scuffle, she immediately asks a favor of Hawk because he's the main character. I know that sounds like I'm making shit up again, but there's really no reason given for her to trust Hawk the way that she seems to this quickly. I know that she probably doesn't actually trust him that much, but again, asking a favor like this immediately out of somebody who hasn't showcased any sort of proclivity for fighting or anything like that besides wearing armor and having a sword, I don't know. She just basically goes, "Oh damn, you look competent. You wanna watch my back in a duel to the death?" Well, this duel doesn't go as planned, as mercenaries flood the courtyard to attempt to assassinate her. After tracking down the source of these mercenaries, Isabella thanks Hawk for the help before joining his party, making her one of the quickest companion grabs in the game. Most of the secondary missions are pretty humdrum and run-of-the-mill as far as what you actually have to do is concerned, but a decent amount of them have semi-interesting story connotations. On the surface though, they're pretty straightforward. Stuff like heading to a mine that's been overrun, figuring out what's gone wrong during an operation with your old smuggler outfit, tracking down an escaped prisoner for a magistrate, and so on. With the smugglers, the lady who you performed slave labor for a year almost seems mad at you for not coming back sooner. Like she's angry at Hawk for leaving and not continuing to provide her with free work. When you attempt to go figure out what's wrong, it turns out that she sent a 15-year-old boy to deliver some goods before he got jumped by a rival gang known as the Coterie. Your options here involve ruthlessly taking the goods back or sending the boy off with them and encouraging him to leave the city. It's not the epitome of amazing quest design, but I do like the option to pilot Hawk's personality this way. And it's not like I'm choosing to make him into an asshole, as taking the goods back means that we get paid, which you could see as the more selfish but necessary decision. As far as the escaped prisoner goes, this one has you tracking the guy down to an old ruin with plenty of spiders and a few undead. On the outside, the magistrate's men stand by, as they were told to wait until you got here and guard the entrance while you capture the prisoner. Alongside these men is an elven guy who claims that the prisoner has been non-stop capturing elven children and killing them, but that he keeps getting let go after getting caught. By the way, what the hell did they do to elves in this game? Their faces are so oddly shaped, I wonder what made them go that route. Either way, rampaging through the ruin has us recovering the elven guy's daughter and confronting the prisoner, who claims that demons have been forcing him to attack elves for being too pretty. In a world with literal demons, it's hard to tell if he's speaking of actual magical entities or if he's referring to the figurative demons in his head. He claims to have went to the circle for help, but that they turned him away after stating that there was nothing wrong with him from a magical perspective. He wants to die, but now you're forced into this position where you can either grant him his request or you can try to get him help. I decided to go through with killing him, but the issue now is that I killed the magistrate's son, which is the reason why the magistrate was so interested in recovering this prisoner in the first place. This is a pretty fun set of twists on a relatively standard setup, and the only thing that I could think to improve it would be if the magistrate ever actually did anything to Hawk after getting angry with him. As things stand though, the guy vows revenge and then just disappears from the game.
You dare show your face to me?
The quest involving the mine is actually one of the few mechanically interesting quests, as it has you fighting dragons about 2 hours or so into the game. Which, for reference, we didn't hit dragons until, I don't know, 25-ish hours into the first game? I would guess 6 or so if you rushed into the Brazilian forest ruins to fight a single dragon boss there. Even the guy who you do this quest for is like, oh, dragons? Huh, thought those were extinct. So they do feel kind of fast here compared to the previous entry. Regardless, your reward for taking all these dragons out is a 50-50 share of the mine, whether you like it or not. You can even refuse to be part of the business, and both the guy and your party will respond as if you accepted his offer. I'm not sure if this was a bug or just something they didn't get around to figuring out from a reward angle. The last Act 1 superfluous quest that I'll talk about stems from one of the big choices that I made in Origins. Since I was the Dwarven noble, I decided to insert my brother Balin onto the throne over his competitor Harrowmont. And since then, Balin's been actively sending the Mafia-like Carta after any remaining potential successor to the Harrowmont bloodline, including his last remaining nephew. This nephew has been tracked to Kirkwall, where Hawk can intervene. From here you can choose whether to fight for Harrowmont or to turn on him for more coin. Now normally the good decision here is to blow the Carta away, but there's a few more strings attached if you went through Origins and decided that Balin was the better pick. Because while I don't think that Harrowmont poses a direct threat to Balin, one of the biggest reasons for picking the Tyrant King was because he intended to overhaul Dwarven traditions and connect Orzammar to the rest of society. And I still agree with that doctrine, so fighting for Balin here would be in line with what I chose before, but Hawk is his own character. And while I did decide to take Harrowmont's side here, I like a lot of the deeper implications in all of this, even if the quest itself isn't anything too special. Now I don't intend to continue summarizing every single side quest, but I do think that the batch that I just outlined really shows that these guys did a pretty good job at taking a very traditional setup for nearly every quest and putting just enough of a twist on it to keep it interesting. The Carta could have been after some random dwarf with no other strings attached. The prisoner could have just simply been a crazy guy who had actually had a demon possessing him. The smuggler quest could have just been a kill the bad guys and grab the loot type of experience. But there were smaller and bigger twists that made these more enjoyable and less of a chore, and I appreciate the direction that most of these took. I think that BioWare had a strong focus towards keeping the player's attention by getting them in and out of quests quickly. When I went through the ruins, the game allows you to just exit immediately from the last room instead of slogging all the way back through, which is generally the same kind of pattern that most of these quests follow. You get the objective, take care of it, and then can immediately progress to the aftermath if you want to. In this way, it feels like a lot of these quests are structured like levels that you select from a menu. And that kind of design definitely has positives and negatives attached to it. On the plus side, it feels good to not need to run back and forth through an empty city if I can just jump to the part that I need to be in. This means that zooming through the quests as fast as I can feels pretty good. On the negative side, the whole game starts to feel a lot less intertwined, and it causes me to feel more detached from it. I don't need to know how Kirkwall's districts connect, or have any reason to try to just explore and memorize different parts. I just look for the golden markers and click on them rather than immersing myself in the game. Kirkwall's layout itself does resemble a pretty lovingly crafted city when you focus on all of the bigger details. Hightown is a more elegant area that has a nice little market, intricate infrastructure that juts up into the sky, banners that hang across various buildings, decorative statues, and embellishments of gold. I think my favorite part of it is the Chantry area. It's just very over the top with how intimidating and opulent that it's set up to be, despite it being a place of prayer. Lowtown is a lot more run down, packed with stalls, shoddy buildings, and elven alienage that's seen better days, a worn-down dock that contains the hovels from spilling out, and shitty back alleys that line the backdrop of everything. And Darktown is the cesspit of Kirkwall. It features a persistent smog that festers up from the sewers that the place was built out of. Rot and disease seem to linger around every corner, as deteriorating buildings barely hold together the shape of something resembling a house. These three areas on the map are very distinct from each other, and are definitely very well done in terms of conveying a particular set of emotions. I would say that the docks is the only place that really feels completely uninspired, as Lowtown looks almost identical at a glance. But the whole city definitely doesn't feel like it has enough life to constitute its size. This place is continuously referred to as packed to the brim with refugees and Kirkwallers, but you really only ever see a sparse handful of people when you're out and about. And yeah, of course this is going to be due to an engine limitation more than likely, but it's really too bad that for all of the detail put into the building architecture and the layout of the city, you're only ever looking at maybe 15 or so people at a time. This might also explain why fights only ever seem to occur at night when you're free roaming, since most NPCs stay indoors when the sun goes down. Would actually also explain the whole reinforcement system. Alright, let's swing back over to the main quest stuff. So first things first. Flemeth gave me that amulet to deliver to the Dalish camp on the outskirts of town. As a reminder, Dalish are the true elves who stick to nature and mix their language into common tongue to show how elven they are. I just like how we get to the outer fringe of the camp, and the guard keeps calling us Shemlin. And Hawk's like, the fuck's a Shemlin? And Aveline replies with, ah, yeah, a racial slur for humans. Hell yeah, this is the Call of Duty lobby of RPGs. So the Dalish Keeper here wants us to take the amulet up the mountain, tell it a bedtime story, and then take it back down the mountain. We don't really know which story to tell it, so we have to take our next companion with us to help out, an elvish woman named Meryl. Our new Welsh-accented companion is a bit awkward when it comes to addressing humans and adapting to their culture. She stumbles over her words pretty consistently and doesn't quite know how to not be clumsy around humans, which can be endearing or annoying depending on your own personal view.
I've done a little fighting before, but it was always alone. I'll try not to hit anyone. On our side, I mean. I'm babbling again, let's go.
After fighting up the world-famous Skeleton Mountain, Meryl continues to be a blood mage, which Bethany dislikes immensely. That doesn't really matter because Bethany's gonna be playing tabletop games in her uncle's basement now that I found a mage to replace her with. After Meryl finishes up her chant, the amulet explodes into another Flemeth. She vaguely explains that she snuck a chunk of her soul into the amulet so that she could just hop out when the time was right. And then she starts spouting off the most out there shit about destiny and seizing opportunity and the Dragonborn and how taxation is theft and all that. I think she slipped in a few lines about the blockchain at one point, but it all seems to be intentionally vague because she's all-knowing. She's like the Kreia of BioWare games. She does make a mention of Morrigan and how she's dealing with her rebellion at the moment, which might actually be the reason why this amulet was made in the first place. I'm not sure if this is ever confirmed in Inquisition, but if I were to guess, Flemeth made this little Horcrux in case her daughter tried to kill her along with the Warden. She gave it to Hawk, died in battle, and then was brought back with the help of this ritual, which actually makes sense when she states that Hawk saved her life. Actually, the more that I say this out loud, the more that it makes complete sense. There is one interesting tidbit earlier on that I never covered concerning side questing, which involves the Qunari. So the ruler of Kirkwall, the Viscount, has a son, and that son has been doing a bit of rebelling against his father, basically trying to escape the keep to venture out into the world. During this adventuring, the son became very interested in the Qunari, and spent all of his time trying to understand their culture while following one of their scouts around. The Viscount took this as his son being kidnapped, but the son claimed that the Qunari was his friend. After some mercenaries killed the Qunari and Hawk killed the mercenaries, the son returns to his father to reprimand him for being so short-sighted as to not even try to understand these horned visitors to their city. The Viscount won't have it, viewing the Qunari as a potential threat to Kirkwall, which sets up one of the big conflicts of the game nicely. Speaking of Qunari, they have their own internal conflict which has been going on in the background. To understand this, you need to know that there are the true Qunari and the rebels who have abandoned their own kind, known as the Tal Vashoth. They have a base outside of the city, which a dwarf wants me to infiltrate and dismantle. If I do this, the dwarf's aim is to gain black powder from the Qunari in exchange for taking care of their rebel problem. After we get this done, we meet at the Qunari's camp within the city, which has us meeting the Qunari leader known as the Arishok. This is probably one of my favorite characters in this game, and he immediately reminds me why I love him in this introductory cutscene.
So, I'm ready to open negotiations for the explosive powder, as we agreed.
No.
You won't honor your bargain?
There is no bargain to honor. His offer for the Gatlock was refused, so he invented a task to prove his worth, when he has none.
I did his dirty work. That debt stands.
Does it, dwarf?
You said yourself there was no bargain. I'm not getting a sodding thing out of this.
This human did what you could not, something I did not expect of any outsider, and you have involved me. If you made a bargain for the Tal Vashoth, that debt for their lives will be honored.
Yeah, we'll be dealing with this absolute Adonis of a being later, but at least we know what we're in for now. The Qunari escapades do continue after this when a Chantry sister begins seeking out someone who can escort a chained-up Qunari mage who can't speak. She believes that the mage wants to leave town to join the other outcasts, though she can't know for sure, obviously. I gotta say, there's a lot of really fun imagery revolving around the Qunari in Dragon Age 2. I know they kind of revamped the look after Origins, which some people didn't like, but I personally really enjoy it. Either way, this whole ordeal leads to an interesting overlap between human Templars and the Qunari. Much like the Templars, the Qunari have a strong distrust of mages, and actually go even further to restrict any of their kind who happen to be able to use magic. This whole getup with the heavy shoulder pauldrons, stitched together lips, mask, and chains is their way of restricting anyone exhibiting magical talent. If a Qunari apostate escapes the master which is assigned to look after them, they're to be killed off. The priestess who sent me with this mage doesn't know these traditions, and obviously didn't realize that she was sending the mage to his doom, though that doesn't seem to bother the guy. When we show up and have most of this stuff explained to us, the conversation results in a fight no matter how you slice it. It's funny because if you choose to tell them that Anders is a mage, they attack. If you choose to protect the Qunari mage's life, they attack. And if you go, oh, alright, yeah, go ahead and kill the mage then, the mage speaks to Hawk, which indicates that he's worthy of being followed. And after killing the mage, the remaining Qunari go, well, he said that you are worth following, which means that you have to submit to ceremonial death, since you spent time with an unsupervised mage and could be corrupted. And then they attack. Why even have different outcomes, am I right? Oh, and after they attack and you save the mage, he lights himself on fire anyway. So it's the exact same thing no matter what, with a few small contextual differences. In defense of BioWare with this lack of difference, they really did want to impress onto the player how different the Qunari culture is, and what it means to be part of the Qun. They live their lives as part of one big unit, and believe themselves to be the role that they are assigned. For example, Sten was just a rank that was assigned to our Origins companion. He goes by that name because that's the name that's given to him as the rank that's given to him. There are other Sten which serve the same purpose as he does within the Qunari's ranks. As such, the Keepers have their own name and rank, the Mages have their own name and rank, and so on. To tell them to simply step away and be something else is unfathomable to most of them, seeing as their entire purpose as a culture is to be selfless and serve the Qun. This means that even the mage here can't imagine not submitting himself to the rules that the Qunari have assigned his role in their society. And it's not as if these mages are viewed as lesser in the eyes of the Qunari. In fact, Qunari mages that are bound and chained are actually highly respected by others in their culture for being selfless and dealing with their internal struggles that come with being a mage. The only outliers in all of this are the Tal Vashoth, which have decided to live for themselves and not follow the ways of the Qun. These rebels are constantly under threat by Qunari's secret police, which attempt to capture and kill or re-educate them via torture in order to force them into becoming mindless slaves. It's a brutal and unforgiving culture, where individuality is beaten down to make the Qun as strong as it possibly can be. After all is said and done, returning to the priestess reveals that she set this whole thing up with the idea that Hawke would be killed by the Qunari so that she could have the Chantry turn against them by showing how violent they are. Hawke living throws a monkey wrench into that plan, obviously, but it's important to show that pretty much every faction in this game is plotting something in the background. With that in mind, our next quest deals with the mages, and what they've been trying to do to get out from under the thumb of the Templars. The long and short of it is that the mages have sent a blood mage to work at the brothel and begin turning Templar recruits against their command. This means running through a blood mage hideout and blowing out everything in the way. The ultimate plan here was to force the Templars to become possessed by demons, which these guys have somehow figured out how to do.
When you talk to Sir Cullen, maybe downplay the blood magic angle. We don't need the Templars cracking down even harder.
Blood mages have infiltrated your ranks.
Nice one, dude. Yeah, this game is a little more classic BioWare in that companions can add to a conversation, but it really doesn't change how anyone responds or proceeds. I mean, occasionally, sure, but most of the time, not really. This did get a little better in later games, but Dragon Age 2 suffers from this phenomenon quite a lot. Regardless, the whole quest can be wrapped up with the Templars realizing that they could better educate the mages they keep locked down, and the recruit that you rescued gets to keep his position. If you go the other way and get the Templars' position stripped, you wind up with a different Aftermath quest in Act 2, which is nice to see after the Qunari mage quest went the way that it did. Alright, there's probably one more main plot quest that's worth mentioning before heading into the Deep Roads. So one of the Templars contacts you at this stage because he's noticed that you've been doing good for the city. He explains that ever since the leader of the Templars, Knight Commander Meredith, took over, the mages have had it much worse than any other branch of the Circle out there. We knew about a lot of this already, but hearing it affirmed by this guy only gives further reason to the rebellion brewing among the mages of Kirkwall. Basically, this Thrask guy found some escaped mages, knew that they were going to be slaughtered for running, and contacted Hawke with the idea that maybe he could talk to them because they've been attacking Templars on sight. Hell yeah, finally a diplomacy mission. Why? I promise I won't get bored if there's no combat, BioWare. I promise. Regardless, we fight our way through a cave with the exact same layout and assets as like 2 other caves that we've been in so far, and the dickhead leader of these escaped mages also attacks us on sight, leaving us like 1 or so leftover mage who decides to talk to us like a sane human being. You can choose to help her out by lying to the Templars out front, or you can decide to turn her over for potential slaughter. If you're toting around people like Aveline and Fenris, you might want to lead towards the Templars, which leads to Templar-specific missions later. But as things stand, I wind up getting old Varric here to spin a lie about how Hawke is a Templar from Ferelden who checked the cave out, which is something that adds to this game for as much as companions usually don't affect average conversation. Instead, there are plenty of moments where you can call on Anders, Aveline, Varric, and so on to directly pass a check in a cool way, usually by automatically convincing someone of something. And that's probably where most of Dragon Age 2's replayability lies. The events are always going to be the same, more or less, but the way that they're led up to can shift in pretty fun ways to keep things a little more fresh. So Act 1 wraps up with the biggest quest yet, the trek into the Deep Roads. There's quite a lot of little differences in how this thing can go, and you can tell that a lot of BioWare's focus was on these big events because of it. Right out of the gate, you can choose whether or not to bring your sibling. If you do bring them, they'll die on this quest unless you bring Anders also and listen to him when the time arrives. I'm not going to be bringing Bethany, so that won't be a thing in this playthrough, but she would have been corrupted by the Blight and then made into a Grey Warden if you go with Anders' plan. After happening upon a blocked part of the road, Hawke decides to clear out one of the dangerous side passages to help the excavation party through. What I don't quite understand is why the party couldn't simply climb over the blockage with ropes and the like. because these guys don't have wagons, beasts of burden, or anything that would require the road to be outright cleared. Honestly, the way that they made this excavation sound, it sounded like they were gonna come down here with a bunch of machinery and carriages, not just a bunch of people on foot carrying a fuckload of crates. Regardless, running ahead has us fighting a swarm of darkspawn and spiders as you might expect, in addition to another dragon herd because why not? The end result has the expedition party rolling into an ancient dwarven thaig, one that has a completely different look from the usual ruins. It's speculated to have been around here since the First Blight, and possibly created by a splinter group of dwarves that went their own way. After finding an idol made of pure lyrium, Varric's brother begins looking like he's gonna fuck us over. And then he fucks us over by shutting a door. The door that leads to the rest of this place that Varric is going to try to excavate and sell off for profit. It's the dwarven greed, man! Nah, it's partly that, but it's also partly that stupid relic that we just gave him corrupting his mind. But we'll get to that. For now, we have to keep pressing forward, which leads us to this new enemy type among the familiar shades. The profane are rock wraiths, which have been feeding on lyrium down in parts of the deep roads. Continuing on has us running into one which has been possessed by a demon which claims that he'll halt all attacks on us and let us go free if we choose to make a deal with it. The deal is that we kill off an ancient rock wraith that's so powerful that the demon can't control it. In return, the demon will reveal the location of the key to get out of here. These choices don't matter at all, and only really serve to affect certain approval ratings within the party and avoiding or engaging in a chunk of combat. If you reject the deal and fight the demon, you'll still have to fight the ancient rock wraith ahead, which is effectively the main boss of Act 1. And even if you do take the deal with the demon, it'll fight you afterwards no matter which dialogue option you choose. I just hate when a choice seems to present a different path, but things turn out to be exactly the same more or less. I'd have liked it if the ancient rock wraith talked to us and we got the opportunity to turn on the demon, or to tell it that we already killed it, allowing us to bypass the rock wraith if we wanted. Sure, it's not like this would have been the defining moment in good quest design, but it would have at least made this whole ordeal feel a bit different when it came to another playthrough. Either way, I wind up rejecting the demon because I have Big Anders with me, and we blow out its kneecaps before heading up to the next rock wraith. This fight's a lot cooler than a lot of Origins boss fights, and takes a lot of what BioWare seemed to learn when creating the DLC Dragon fight. Basically, this thing will weave in and out of the ground before gathering a bunch of enemy and exploding it outward, forcing the party to hide behind the pillars around the room to avoid it. After we emerge from the deep roads with our bountiful treasure in tow, we hit another time skip. This time it's been 3 years, and Hawk has purchased a mansion in Hightown with his earnings. I do like this because there are a few moments in Origins where you see this absolute pile of treasure, but you can only grab like 2 things from it. That is the case here on a surface level, but Hawk does see that gold and decides to invest it in a home, which is a cool way to not over-reward a player while still displaying that Hawk didn't just walk away from heaps of money. As far as what's happened in this interim, Bethany was shipped off to the Circle after they figured out that she was a mage. Since we're in good with the Viscount after helping out his son, no harm befalls Hawk's mother or uncle for harboring her, but she's gonna be pretty much absent for a while from here on out. The big conflict for Act 2 is focused on the Qunari, who are still sitting in Kirkwall while stating that they're waiting for their ship to arrive. At this point, people are suspicious, seeing as it shouldn't have taken this long, and the Qunari have historically only showed up to places to conquer them. The Viscount has no forces which are capable of kicking them out without the city being destroyed, and he has enough problems trying to control the Templars, the Chantry, and the Mages. Besides, the Arishok and his Qunari haven't asked for a single thing now in these 4 years, so there hadn't been that big of an issue beyond how people have been antsy around them. Now the Arishok does want something, but being as blunt as he's always been, he only tells the Viscount that he wants to speak with Hawk in person. We'll be getting to that after covering any interesting side stuff in the act. At first glance, you really only have 3 main quests and some companion check-ins though, which don't take too long to run through. But then you get to your mansion, and Hawk dresses in his finest Hugh Hefner special before discovering the writing desk, which hits you with every fucking quest in the game apparently. Nah, just kidding. Most of these are just aftermath notes alluding to how various people have gotten on since you've helped them and actual spam mail. Flag flying at half-mast? Does your soldier not stand to attention? Simply send me the details of an open bank account in Kirkwall, and I will arrange that the funds are transferred to you. You can also walk around the mansion and examine various parts of it to have Hawk talk about anything that sticks out.
Isabella seemed disappointed that she didn't find anything worth gossiping about. Isabella.
Now, up until this point in the game, I was pretty damn sure that the DLC for Dragon Age 2 was activated fully. Turns out that I was wrong, and I'm glad that I caught this. While not as convoluted as Origins, Dragon Age 2's DLC on EA's wonderful application does still have to be activated manually for every single piece. So now I have every single bit of purchasable equipment, which encompasses a staggering amount of gear. Most of this stuff is either the best gear in the game or just shy of it, which is one of the sillier things about Dragon Age 2's DLC. I mean, this absolutely ruins gear progression in every fathomable way. And I know that the answer is just, well, don't use it then. But I'm a human being, and I have this crazy tendency to look at stats on gear and go, oh, well, this is the best stuff that I could be using right now. I'd say that at the time when this game was fresh, I never would have bought this stuff. It's a single-player adventure game and it's not necessary to complete it. But when it comes with the complete edition of the game, I'm gonna use it. I guess it just felt more rewarding overall to have beginner gear that was great for the first couple of levels but was outpaced by mid-game equipment, rather than now having gear that scales with my level and will never be replaced beyond the occasional best-in-slot endgame equipment piece. Either way, it turns out that I also missed a bit of questing for the DLC companion, Sebastian. Fortunately, it can still be picked up and completed in the second act, so let's talk about that real quick. Your first look at Sebastian has you witnessing an argument in the Chantry courtyard before he storms off after pinning a note to the Chantry's notice board. The note reads that he's offering a reward on the heads of a mercenary company which killed his entire family. After taking care of the company, Sebastian thanks you and fills you in a bit about how he's the Prince of Starkhaven, and how he has no clue as to who deployed these mercenaries against his family. After a bit of time, Sebastian does find out that a rival noble family eradicated his people. It's strange because when he finds this out, he's like, ah shit. Wow, I should not have sent Hawk to kill those mercenaries who were just doing their jobs. Like, what the fuck did you expect? They didn't decide to do it for no reason, dude. But either way, the guy does join us from here on out, and we can engage in his vengeance quest whenever we like. The quest itself means heading over to this rival family's manor, which has the same layout as all of the other manors in the city, more or less. Inside are various members of this family who have all lost their minds. We go from room to room and find these people doing crazy shit, and Sebastian's like, oh wow, these guys are nuts. They didn't used to be like this, we gotta stop this, wow. The entire plot is one of the more straightforward ones, with the reason for betrayal being a demon ruin that was unearthed beneath the manor's grounds. After a Desire Demon was released, everything was set into motion when it enhanced the head of the family's jealousy to the point where Sebastian's family got wiped out. It's an alright questline, but it did feel like it could have been filled in with a bit more intrigue than, suddenly demons appeared. Side questing in Act 2 is more of the same kind of run around and kill / grab things, which ranges from decent at best to annoying at worst. There's definitely less in terms of secondary questing, but more in the companion questing category, which will be covered in the companion roundup. The only secondary quest worth talking about in any sort of detail is actually one of my favorites, and oddly enough involves you diving into the Fade, which wasn't so great in Origins. This time the devs revamped a lot of the themes, made the whole experience shorter, and kept things pretty interesting overall. There are floating attribute points, but you don't just run up and grab them, you have to do a puzzle. 2 of them involve shuffling barrels around, and 1 of them involves you trying to catch a floating book. Then you have the demons. The first one is the Demon of Sloth, which offers you a choice between power, knowledge, and magic. Power grants 6 attribute points, knowledge grants 1 skill or talent point, and magic grants some unique magic resistance runes. Unfortunately for my gains, I have Anders with me, who has taken the form of Justice. And that fuckhead will attack me if I deal with Sloth here, so no fun for me. That said, there's still a lot of variance to this whole thing, as confronting the other demons has us first trying to save Fainriel from... Oh yeah, we're in this dream to save an elf named Fainriel. I forgot about that. Anyways, we have to save the elf from these demons by convincing him that they're demons.
It's not your father, Fainriel. You're trapped in the Fade by a demon.
That's not the Keeper, Fainriel. Demons can take on other forms.
And when you do that, the demon pops out and tries to corrupt your companions. First off, we have the Desire Demon, which, chooses Isabella. Yeah, that one was pretty obvious. I absolutely hate this line from her, though.
I like big boats, I cannot lie.
Sir Mix-a-Lot officially gets royalties from EA for this dumbass line. He doesn't, but he should. Anyways, after hammering Isabella into the ground like a cartoon nail, we move on to the next demon. The Demon of Pride manages to get his hooks into Varric, claiming that he should be the hero over his betraying brother. Well, guess that was all that was needed here. And then that's unfortunately it. There was a rage demon that was just a normal encounter that I guess represented wrath, but we didn't get to see Fainriel battle a buffet of food with a hunger demon, or see him get jealous with a desire demon over someone's PS2 when all he had was an Atari. At the end, we convince the fella that he can overcome the Fade, and then he awakens from his slumber. Now the really cool part is that obviously there are different outcomes depending on who you bring with you into the Fade. Aveline can be tempted with her dead husband. Meryl and Fenris can be tempted by pride. Anders is really the only one who's immune to these temptations, though like I said before with Sloth, he will attempt to dome you if you try to take its offer. And all of these outcomes lead to conversations with the betraying companion afterwards, which is a nice touch. If you did take the Sloth Demon's deal, you can choose to honor or to betray it at the end of the road, with the honoring causing Fainriel to be possessed. The possession affects the game a bit later, causing Fainriel's possessed form to inflict horrific nightmares and insanity on a lot of people around him. And finally, you can choose to kill Fainriel in his dream, which causes him to become tranquil in real life. So yeah, really solid quest with lots of outcomes and fun interactions. This is what the Fade should have been like in the last game, and it's cool to see the devs get it right in this game. Beyond the Fade quest though, there really aren't too many secondary quests to write home about. Most of them revolve around clearing out different bits or dealing with stolen cargo for the mine that you own half of, with one or two outliers that almost always tend to come down to just a fight or two. So let's move on and hit the companion roundup now that we're plunging into Act 2's main quests. One of the more interesting things about companions in Dragon Age 2 is that they don't ever really hang out in one centralized hub. They don't chill at Hawke's uncle's place or at a bar or wherever. They just kinda have their own areas of the city where they hang out. Aveline's around the guard area, Fenris is in his former master's mansion, Varric's at the pub, and so on. This actually lends a bit more realism to interacting with them, even if it did make sense in Origins for everyone to be at the camp. What's even better is that you don't really need to worry about heading into these places randomly to check and see if Isabella has something new to say, or Meryl, or whoever. And while it initially felt weird to head to a quest, talk to someone, and have the quest complete, it does make sense on pen and paper when you're worried about whether or not somebody needs to be talked to. All that said, this system does make me feel considerably less attached to my party overall. I know it sounds weird to say that talking to everyone in one camp over and over between every quest is better for bonding, but it really is. Even if only one or two companions have something new to say, checking in is a lot easier and feels more natural. So it's really a matter of convenience and realism versus forming a bond by checking in consistently. Plus, companions in Dragon Age 2 seem to have a lot less overall to say, and prefer short bursts of minute-long conversations max rather than lengthy stories about their past or insights on a quest that you just completed or thoughts on the future. Their attitude is almost always lighthearted, more playful and less deep, or at least so it seems. Because even when you do bring them a particular gift that they like or they have something serious to say, they tend to say their piece, listen to Hawke's response, and then lighten things up with a joke. This makes romancing them dreadfully straightforward, with few opportunities to win their hearts when compared to Origins. You don't really need to get to know them on a deeper level to understand what they do and don't like to hear. Most of the time, you simply have to use common sense and strike the big heart option on the dialogue wheel, which makes the player less attached overall. I actually initially had probably double the amount of stuff to say for each of these companions, but I realized later that I was investing way too much analysis into characters that didn't really have enough dialogue to justify a deep dive like I did with Origins. So let's kick off this roundup with Hawke's sister Bethany. Bethany is a pretty boring character all things considered. The issue here is that Hawke knows his sister, so there's a lot of stuff that the player doesn't get to quiz her on. And because I don't have the Sweet Home Alabama edition of the game, there's no romancing her obviously. Most of her interest seems to be involved with her mother and her uncle, which I suppose serve as a type of anchor to tie Hawke down as a person with a backstory. But listening to her go on and on about her mother and her father and her uncle and her dead brother just kinda drags her down as a character. The only reason that I can come up with her being the way that she is because BioWare instead focused on things that can happen to her. Obviously she can die, she can become a Grey Warden, or she winds up in the Circle. making it so that the potential for interaction with her is pretty minimal after the first act. They didn't want to invest too much into Bethany because they had already planned on her going away for a lot of the game. BioWare does historically have a hard time creating interesting characters that can't be a love interest though, at least in my opinion. Wynne in particular was my least favorite companion in Origins. Shale wasn't too far behind, and although I enjoyed Oghren and Sten in their own ways, they weren't incredibly deep characters. And the thing that they all had in common was their lack of romance options, which continues to point to the idea that BioWare really only goes all out with writing and character development when it comes to companions that they designed with courtship in mind. Now there are some counterexamples, most of which actually exist in this game, but the MO at this stage has trended very much towards romanceless characters getting the short end of the development stick. Likewise, Bethany's missions and conversations start and end in Act 1, barring one extra quest in one of the DLC. Both of these quests in Act 1 relate to Hawke and Bethany's uncle and what their family lost. I guess I haven't really explained this, but the siblings' mother was actually part of a really wealthy family. Their mother gave up that birthright when she went off to Lothering to marry an apostate, meaning that their uncle saw to the estate when Hawke's grandfather died. The uncle then lost the estate and all of the money that he received through the will to slavers when he gambled it away. So Bethany gets it in her head that her deadbeat uncle probably spent her mother's money that was supposed to be given to her through the will when their grandfather died. But the uncle claims that their mother was left no money. To get to the bottom of this, we're to break into the estate, slink into the vault, and read the will. Oh yeah, and kill a bunch of guards who are just milling around this darkened shithole. Yeah, I can't just have it so that there's some sort of diplomatic approach or a way to coerce the owner or anything that requires finesse and not slaughter. But regardless. The will reveals that the estate and all of the money was actually left to Hawke and Bethany's mother, and that the uncle illegally took it and gambled it away. Hawke's mother goes off to try to get it back, which leads to the second conversation quest for Bethany. This conversation has you giving her a portrait of your mother, which she's stoked about. The ensuing chat then leads to Bethany revealing that she blames herself for being a burden on the family, seeing as her apostate status led to them turning away from Kirkwall and hiding from the Circle in Lothering, followed by how much she misses her dead brother. The biggest issue with Bethany is that she tends to want to be a wallflower, and she always pushes her brother into the spotlight so that she can sit on the sidelines, barring a few key moments, which again doesn't really make for a great character. Likewise, I really don't have too much more to say about her. Despite her name sounding like a line of makeup, Aveline is a tough chick in every sense of the word. But she isn't rude or unfair by any means, at least not towards Hawke. She's intelligent, very direct, on the straight and narrow, and enjoys sorting people out who deserve it, making her the perfect city guard member. When asked about her dead husband, Aveline doesn't have much to say, stating bluntly that her feelings are for her alone. She tends to keep things inside her, while exuding a lot of compassion for other victims of the Blight. She's definitely a very good paladin type in nearly every sense, though she's not particularly religious. While she isn't the most interesting from a sheer personality perspective, Aveline definitely feels like she's a good friend throughout the game. In a lot of ways, she reminds me of the role that Alistair fulfills in Origins, though I'd put her a step or two down from him just because Alistair has that sarcastic zing and immense character development as time goes on. Still, there are plenty of things to do with her in terms of companion questing, seeing as she's part of the city guard. Act 1's quests are surprisingly fun, as the first one has you taking out some well-armed highwaymen on a patrol route. The twist here though is that Aveline was not supposed to do this, because it wasn't her assignment. After getting chewed out by her boss, Aveline checks to see who was supposed to be patrolling that route, only to discover that it was going to be a single officer who definitely would have died or been kidnapped. Yeah, it turns out that the captain here was in deep with the seedier elements of the city, basically sending guards off to deliver sensitive Viscount documents to different groups. When this gets exposed, Aveline takes his place as the new captain of the guard.
You will assume the captain's job.
What?
Just look at that deeply shocked face. From here, the new captain has to deal with a steeper and steeper pile of shit, as you might expect out of her new position. She playfully blames Hawke for part of her workload, though she doesn't actually seem to be upset with him rampaging through the city as the most successful Ferelden in its history. Interestingly enough, you can't pursue the strong guard captain romantically. Not that she has to be attracted to Hawke, but more that, well, BioWare has a type. Soft, feminine features, maybe a bit of skin exposed, dateable. Handsome, rugged, and a bit mysterious. Dateable. But Aveline is a bit more chiseled and covered, just as Varric is, a dwarf, I guess. So you can't date Aveline, and she isn't interested in Hawke as more than just a friend. To be fair, this is made up for when Aveline does show some attraction towards one of the guardsmen under her command. This is a really cute scene, as Aveline clearly does not know how to jump back into dating after moving on from her deceased husband. She wants to show how much this guardsman means to her, and she doesn't want to just say it. So first she gets him a copper plate engraved with marigolds.
This is for you. It's apparently very important.
I'll take you at your word. It's a copper relief of marigolds? And it helpfully says so. Marigolds.
I thought it was clear. Metal is strong, copper ages well, flowers are soft.
Then she tries to woo the guy by sticking him onto the safest patrol route, which a lot of guards would kill for. He takes this as being too incompetent for the dangerous work.
I can fix this. I need 3 goats and a sheaf of wheat.
Eventually, the plan is for Aveline to go out on a patrol with the guy, as she feels she can best express herself while she's doing her job. But she can't bring herself to say what she needs to when the two are killing bandits. So Hawke runs ahead and clears the route for her while she and the guy follow behind. After smashing an assload of pit bulls who are probably on their way to maul some toddlers, the route is free of threats so Aveline can make her move.
So this route's pretty quiet?
Yes, and it's a real nice night for an evening. What do you think about blades?
I'm sorry, Captain. I drifted off a bit.
Yeah, Hawke has to push a bit, which... Yeah, okay, so there's one thing I neglected to mention about all of this. But the entire time you get these heart options, right? You can choose to flirt with her at nearly every given opportunity, which I always found to be odd. Because she's clearly very interested in this other guy, but you can choose to have Hawke constantly trying to get with her throughout this exchange. I just don't know who that roleplay is for, I guess. I want my Hawke to be a dejected sad boy so I can really put myself in his shoes. Either way, there are a few different approaches here, but I do think that the end result is pretty damn cute if you go through with pushing these two together. Basically, Hawke calls out Aveline, the guard walks away, and Aveline flips her shit while angrily telling Hawke that she thought that they were friends. Venturing back to the keep has the guard dropping by and the two of them fucking in her office. Or something. I don't know, there was giggling and then there was this noise. But yeah, all's well that ends well. Aveline's a good, strong character who knows what she's about and dives into anything that she wants to head first. She does have issues, but she tends to deal with any personal feelings on her own and only asks for help when she needs it. While she isn't my favorite companion, I wouldn't put her on the low end by any means either. Varric's a good guy through and through, despite his entanglement in the underbelly of Kirkwall. While his connections may be seedy in nature, he tends to use those connections for good, while opening up a lot of opportunities for those that he's taken a shine to.
Daisy, for my sake, please quit cutting through the alleys in Lowtown alone at night.
Nothing ever happens. I'm perfectly safe, Varric.
Yes, I know. And that nothing is costing me a fortune.
This kind of goodness leads to a lot of questions from Varric, who hasn't quite met anyone like Hawke. He wants to know what it is that makes Hawke tick, what his plans are, and why he acts the way that he does. And this line of questioning makes sense with Varric being our orator of the game. While listening to our rogue smooth talk his way through the game is always a treat, I think one of the more interesting aspects to him is just how adapted to the surface that he is despite being a dwarf. I mean, it does make sense, the guy was born on the surface after his family was kicked out of Orzammar for fixing proving fights. But it does make you wonder what Varric's childhood must have been like with parents that weren't used to seeing the sky. In Origins, you'd occasionally get a dwarven merchant or warrior on the surface. They'd dwarf it up while going about their business, but they'd still be pretty dedicated to their people below in Orzammar. Varric is the exception, and his disdain for Orzammar and the way of his people shows whenever the topic comes up. He views them as almost primitive, holding on to things their ancestors did while living in smelly, cramped caves. He callously notes that his brother Bartrand would sell a member of his family off for the right amount of coin, which harkens back to a lot of the old ways of his people. So when his brother betrayed him after all of the stuff that Varric did for Bartrand in the background, it really got under our orator's skin. You'll constantly hear him muttering about various ways to kill his brother from here on out, even going back and forth with Anders about what the best method would be. When Varric does finally track his brother down, a scene plays out where the dwarf pops in and Rambos about 50 archers before getting to his brother, who begs for his life. This is one of the best parts about Varric, who again is exaggerating and trying to make himself look better to the Seeker who he's telling his story to. She tells him to cut the crap and tell the truth, which he begrudgingly does after trying to weasel out of telling her. So yeah, Bartrand went crazy after grabbing the lyrium idol, as mentioned before. Basically, he began forcing his guards and staff to start eating lyrium so that they could hear the song that the idol supposedly sang to him. He started chopping off pieces of them while they were still alive, and allowed his manor to get totally trashed while his now insane guards roamed it. Having Anders temporarily heal the dwarf's mind has him begging for his brother to kill him, though this only makes Varric decide that he wants to save him instead. It's definitely tough seeing Varric trying his best to deal with this new turn of events, but he keeps a stoic front about it and continues to spend his time making up stories for fun. His desire to pass down tales makes him feel a lot more real to me, as I fully understand the desire to entertain while mixing in the truth about different events. If I had to compare Varric to someone, it'd be Dandelion from the Witcher series, though Varric is definitely a fighter as well as a speaker. He's a fun person to listen to, and his actions often speak louder than his words, despite his words carrying a considerable amount of weight to them. He's just a solid character, and I really don't think that Dragon Age 2 would be the same without him.
I love the sound of my own voice, and I'm a compulsive liar.
So yeah, small, clumsy, awkward elf girl. Though to be fair, it makes complete sense with the way that she's always been entangled in her own Dalish clan, which spends its time moving from wilderness to wilderness hunting and living off of the land. I actually didn't realize this at first, but Meryl did show up in the first game as a temporary companion during the Dalish elf origin, which is pretty fun. Meryl's never been too popular even in her own clan, seeing as she was a bookish type who would rather study than make friends. This makes her the epitome of a low-wisdom, high-intelligence character. More importantly than her being a bookworm though, Meryl is a blood mage, which is something that even people like Anders tend to get angry about. Holy shit, BioWare, can you please learn how to model hands? I am begging you. Sorry, I just needed to get that off my chest. Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah, Meryl's kind of a dumbass when it comes to street smarts. I mean that in the nicest way possible. I mean, she's cute, but kind of like in a, my younger sister just dunked my controller into blue paint because I told her my favorite color was blue, sort of way.
Don't be silly. A dowry would only matter if you were courting him.
Oh, Meryl.
You're courting him! Do you know I saw someone get mugged? Right outside. It was fascinating.
Someone has jumped outside your door, and that's exciting.
It must be the alien age greeting. Hasn't happened to me yet, though. They must not like me.
Like, how the fuck do you know what a mugging is, but not understand that it's bad? That's not low wisdom, that's bad writing. Regardless, airheadedness aside, Meryl's first and maybe only priority seems to be her people. Most of what she's interested in are things that she thinks benefits or reflects the Dalish people directly, and you can see this when she hardly pays attention to anything else despite all of these factions that are at each other's throats rampaging across Kirkwall. As such, most of Meryl's intelligence shines through when talking about her people and their history. She reveals later on that she was booted out of her tribe when she refused to give up a fragment of a mirror that was formerly used to communicate across great distances with other Dalish. Since she's out here on her own now, she's taken it upon herself to gather more of these fragments to complete and study the mirror despite warnings of danger from her keeper. Obviously, the mirror itself isn't the dangerous thing, it's the blood magic that she's using to restore it. But Meryl is well aware of the risks involved in the restoration process, and she gets mad at those who try to baby her over it. Her best efforts to repair the mirror weren't enough, and she notes that she needs a finishing tool to complete it, which her clan has. So she begs Hawk to accompany her to convince the Keepers to give this tool up, which involves her invoking the Rite of Side Questing. The Rite of Side Questing is an ancient elven tradition in which any artifact can be claimed for a temporary amount of time by any Dalish in exchange for doing a side quest for the previous owner. This time the rite involves taking on a big old bug in the caves nearby. On our way through them, another Dalish guy comes running out and begs for help. As soon as he sees Meryl, he nopes the fuck out and runs back towards the big bug. This gets him killed, which Anders blames Meryl for dabbling in blood magic.
Maybe he was thinking, blood mage! That seems the most likely scenario.
Turns out that Anders is pretty spot on, and the Keeper here has been spreading rumors about how bad Meryl is for turning to blood magic, painting her as a boogeyman of sorts. Must have been pretty bad for this guy to run screaming back into the cave towards a giant insect monster. Regardless, the Keeper honors her word by giving Hawk the mirror repair tool, and you get to decide whether or not to give it to Meryl. Withholding it from her pretty much reverses any friendship with Meryl and pushes her into rivalry hard. And I know that usually stuff like this is a non-choice unless you really hate a particular companion, but Meryl is kind of a special case. She's this aloof doofus who consistently showcases her own short-sightedness at any given moment. Sure, she can be charming and cute, but it seems to be a clear case of someone who's very book-smart taking things a little too far. The counter-argument here comes from her, when she explains that blood magic is little more than a tool to her, that she gained it when she had no other way of cleansing a corrupt shard of the mirror. It's interesting because blood magic is almost always associated with the most evil and vile form of sorcery. But Meryl has never exhibited a lack of control, at least not yet. So why is this risk so important to her? Well, with Meryl being the bookworm that she is, Dalish history became a key fragment of her character. Tales from the past depicted the elves as a tremendously strong people, one who had a very rich culture with plenty of lands to call their own. And all of that is gone now, with the Dalish instead being forced to move from location to location, losing their people's historical significance one generation at a time. Meryl became attached to this and wanted to do anything that she could to restore the tiniest piece of Dalish culture, even something as small as a telephone mirror. The irony in all of this is that although Meryl wants to help her people remember the old ways, they would rather leave them in the past, stating that trying to restore this fragment of their past would only lead to their ruin. Because of this, Meryl is looked down on and pitied by her own people. And it's led to her putting every hope that she has at redemption in her clan's eyes into getting the mirror working, which she expresses to Hawk after returning with the tool to fix it. Romancing Meryl is quite a bit different from every other companion to my knowledge. Yes, of course you get the flirting option, but it hardly ever leads to any gains in friendship over choosing a more diplomatic option, which makes a surprising amount of sense given Meryl's naive nature. But there's a little more to it than that, because she does eventually visit Hawk at his estate, and more or less explains that mixing races is bad for her people's future. I mean, she doesn't state that outright, but it's heavily implied in her Meryl mannerisms. Either way, you can sweet talk her into bed, which has her swapping out her tunic and chainmail for… what's her hand doing? Where's her arm going? Why is her body shade darker than her face and neck? Good God, BioWare, you gotta get your shit together, brother.
I love you.
All of that said, even though I ticked all of the romance boxes here, Meryl is a really difficult character for me to see in a romantic light. Yeah, she's cute, sure, but her obsession with restoring this mirror and defending blood magic and all of that makes it really hard to form a romantic connection to her character. I feel like if this game did have an option for Hawk to be Dalish, then maybe there'd be a little more wiggle room for him to see her that way. And I'm not playing into her race-mixing concerns, I'm more thinking about how entangled she is in her own race, and how much of her personality that she's made it. If she had more interests and ideals beyond the plight of the Dalish, I would say that there's more of a match here. But like I said at the beginning of all of this, beyond her immense knowledge of her people's ways, she's kind of like a goofy and naive sibling most of the time. Almost all of what Meryl is stems from her actions and goals rather than what she says, and that makes it hard for me to take her seriously as a love interest and to an extent a companion. I do think that she fits into the cast, and I think that all of the pieces were here for her to be one of the most prolific and fascinating companions, but she needed a bit of editing to make her truly enjoyable for me. What is there to say about Anders? Well, a lot. But most of it is probably better covered in my Origins DLC video. Here's the basics. Anders was a circle mage before he kept escaping it over and over. During one of his recaptures, the warden grabbed him and made him a warden also. And then after saving the day, Anders escaped from the wardens after they made him give up his pet cat. So yeah, that's what we're dealing with here. The guy rode the line between absolute goofball with a sharp wit to the nicest and most compassionate companion in the DLC at times. That said, he has gotten way more serious since the last game, as a lot of his focus is keeping mages free of Templar control. Oh, and he merged personalities and thoughts with the Ghost of Christmas Past. Yeah, that whole thing is really interesting because I thought that Justice was kind of a stale character when evaluating the Origins DLC on its own. But it was a setup for Dragon Age 2 where the idea becomes a lot more interesting. I still do think that Justice isn't amazing by himself. But now that he's merged and changed how Anders thinks, I do see the merit of him existing in the DLC the way that he did. Regardless, Anders can't talk to Justice in any way, and instead only becomes overpowered by him when he gets angry and loses control. This usually only happens when Templars are involved. But the fact that Anders outright loses consciousness when Justice comes out scares him. He describes it as a curse of sorts, though he understands that it was a curse of his own making. But the more interesting part about all of this is just how much Anders has changed from the Origins DLC. If you had never played it, it's probably a bit of a shock knowing how often he remarked on women and their bodies, and how lighthearted he seemed to be. Now he's a lot more straightforward and focused. His friend that he killed was actually his lover, and the entire ordeal has only further pushed his focus to take out his wrath on the Templars. You can choose to step in as a rebound if you want, but I wasn't interested in it personally. Even if I were interested in Anders that way, I really have a hard time finding a romantic connection to his character. It's just really difficult to see Hawke dating this guy who has exhibited a constant one-note personality, who has consistently mentioned the Templars over and over every time you talk, which is kind of how I felt about Meryl. As time goes on, it becomes more and more apparent that Anders is really struggling to not go full scorched earth on the Templars. He worries about his own self-control, his overwhelming urge to destroy those who are hunting his kind, and about Hawke who's defending him and protecting him. Of course, the Templars aren't really helping to dissuade Anders from going after them, seeing as one of them has taken to torturing mages and trying to make as many of them tranquil as he can. We wind up going after the guy and find him cornering a mage who escaped to try to see her mother. I know this is kind of the point to this whole ordeal, but this blatantly bad Templar getting in the face of this girl who's like, "Oh no, I just was trying to see my mother," is not very compelling. But we kill all of the Templars and then Justice loses his shit. So this is one of those inevitabilities where you knew some shit was going to go down with Anders losing control, but I felt like the execution is sorely lacking. Basically, we kill these guys and Justice is still bloodthirsty and trying to fight after they're already dead. And he decides to confront the mage who he just saved, who calls Justice a demon. Justice gets even more mad and goes to kill the mage because, I don't know, he's just angry. If there's one emotion or idea that you can associate with the spirit of justice, it's the concept of wrath. Which I know I'm intentionally missing the point here because Anders goes on record saying that Justice has transformed into the spirit of vengeance now, but still, I feel like all of this is a little too cliche, too straightforward. I don't know how else to describe it. Anyways, you can allow Justice to kill the girl or you can tell him to stop, which snaps Anders out of it. From here we find out that this rogue Templar was acting independently when he was running around and turning every mage that he could tranquil. Anders had originally thought that this was an officially sanctioned action, which is why he was so on edge about the whole thing. But thankfully this isn't the case because that would be some pretty bad writing to just have all the Templars and the Chantry just decide to ignore all consequences and declare a war on the mages. Now emboldened by Hawke's faith in him, Anders is feeling hopeful after finding out that the actions of the Templar that we killed weren't official orders. So now that we dodged that bullet, what's the next move? A little diplomacy maybe? Nope. Anders wants to lead a revolution against the Chantry. Yeah, I mean, not that the mages don't deserve the same rights as everyone else, but the Chantry just made it clear that they don't want to shackle every mage and force them to become mindless. So it seems a little quick to jump straight to revolution.
So, a drunk says the Grand Cleric funded zealots through a rogue Templar. This is enough evidence for you?
Perhaps I should try talking to the Grand Cleric. Maybe she's more reasonable than I thought.
The Chantry itself must be overturned.
This is enough evidence for you.
By himself in Dragon Age 2, Anders is pretty boring, honestly. He's all about freeing the mages and sticking it to the Templars, and he serves as a conduit for that well enough. Of course, the big thing that he does do later is interesting and, stupid. But when you're just looking at how he talks as a companion to you, his conversations aren't the most riveting or insightful. It's kind of how I felt about Justice during the Origins DLC. And likewise, the most interesting part of Anders stem from his actions, not his character, which makes it really hard for me to place him any higher than a mid-tier companion. The first thing that most are gonna think when they see Fenris is, who's this edgelord? And that's a reasonable assessment for our white-haired, pointy-eared companion. At a glance, I immediately assumed the guy was gonna be a rogue or a mage, but he's actually a warrior, which is a pretty fun subversion of expectations. He studied the blade. Oh wait, no, maybe that does make sense. Although he is out for blood, Fenris doesn't actually have that much of an edgy personality for as much as Varric gives him shit for brooding all the time. He's reasonable and polite for the most part, and cautious but still willing to help you out. The reason he is cautious though is his burning distrust for mages. There's a little bit to unpack with what exactly happened with Fenris, and how it influences his personality. And it takes a bit of time for him to fully open up about what happened there. He does drop a hint every here and there, but he doesn't indulge the full details until Act 2. Basically, the guy was captured from his clan and experimented on by Tevinter mages, which is where his tattoos came from. These tattoos are infused with lyrium, and give him powers to phase through solid matter. He's used these powers to Mortal Kombat fatality people in the past via walking into them and solidifying, exploding them from the inside out. Which is fucking metal. But the price for this power was that the pain was so immense that he forgot everything about his past. When he was finished being experimented on, his master named him Fenris and kept him locked away before he made his escape. After the initial 3-year time leap, Fenris is still waiting in his former master's mansion for him to return so that he can kill the guy. But during this time, he found out that the mansion never belonged to his former master in the first place, which has put him at a loss as to what to do. He's unsure how to start over, to live a life free of a vengeance quest, and that lack of purpose has begun to pick away at his mental health, which is something that he confides in Hawk. There's a point where you can track down his master's apprentice, who tormented Fenris constantly when he was still a slave. Although he winds up sticking his hand into her chest and crushing her heart, the emotional damage bubbles to the top and causes him to lose his cool. He had been trying to suppress all of these emotions, but this only rekindled them, causing him to leave the party for a bit. When he returns, you can choose to pursue a romance with him from here. I personally didn't decide to pursue a relationship, but unlike Anders and Meryl, I can actually see Fenris's disposition and personality being intriguing enough to do so. A lot of the little things that he says and thoughts that he has are varied enough to be more than "I hate mages and slavers," even if that is the cornerstone of much of his dialogue. And while I don't find him to be the most compelling character, he is interesting enough for me to wish that he had a little more to say than he does. Eventually, Fenris does confide in you exactly how he escaped his former master, which actually offers up one of the most unique companion perspectives across both Origins and Dragon Age 2. You see, Fenris was left behind in Qunari lands after his master wasn't allowed to bring him on an escaping ship. This meant that Fenris had to escape into the jungle after being wounded when a battle broke out between the Qunari and the Tevinter mages. After being nursed back to health by some Qunari fog warriors, he lived among them and learned their ways. He was finally in a place where people seemed to care about him. But when his master came back to find him, he was ordered to kill every fog warrior there, and Fenris obliged. When someone who's been a slave for literally as long as they remember is ordered to do something by their master, they often don't have the proper mental perspective to just refuse. They've been broken over and over, forced to do a lot of stuff that they had no choice in, and obeying becomes an instinct rather than a thoughtful decision. When Fenris killed the people that he had been living with and who had cared for him, something finally snapped, and he decided to flee, bringing him eventually to where he is now. It's again one of the most interesting perspectives out of any of these companions just because of how realistic Fenris's psyche is painted. And although I do wish that he would have expanded a little more on the whole thing, I like the imagery presented here quite a lot. So our stacked to the rafters, thigh-displaying, cleavage-brandishing companion is a former pirate captain who ran her ship into a reef during the same storm that the Qunari wound up getting pounded by. Before that, she worked for a merchant who dealt in slaves, though she didn't know it at the time. She was the lady who was hanging out in the brothel in Origins who teaches you the duelist specialization, though she looked pretty drastically different then. When Isabella did find out that she was to transport humans, elves, and children who had been promised a safe place away from the Blight, she wound up freeing them before the whole shipwreck thing happened. So her main issue now is dealing with her now former boss, who forced her into hunting down an ancient relic that was worth more than the slaves that she freed. Isabella's basically been trying to track down any info in Kirkwall about this relic since the ship went belly up, or so she tells you. Beyond her personal issues though, Isabella is an extremely flirtatious individual. You can tell that it's part of the reason that she's gotten as far as she has, as she flaunts what she's got before using her combat skills to take what she needs. This is seen almost immediately through her initial fight at the bar, and when she invites Hawk back to her room at the pub where she spends her nights getting hammered. The flirtatious side is also seen when she's meeting up with Fenris at his place, eyeballs his cock and balls, and then leaves with a wink. It's also seen when she goes from talking about getting railed by one of her crew members to talking about having wanted to get plowed by Hawk for a long time. It's also seen when she does get plowed by Hawk. As far as actual love goes though, Isabella does seem to appreciate Hawk's refreshing honesty and willingness to jump into action, which she remarks on every here and there. But she claims to have no interest in love, stating that she was sold off into marriage once by her mother and has never looked at romance the same since. Interestingly enough, Zevran was the one who killed her husband, effectively freeing her. But the whole experience of being shackled to a man who used her as a trophy really tainted her view on anything to do with love, and she initially rejects the hell out of Hawk when he attempts to bring feelings into the picture. After interacting with Isabella as part of my main party, I do feel like a lot of her character is forced at times. Like the writers wanted her to ooze this badass tough chick nature, but sometimes they went a little too far, which leads to moments like these.
You know, Ravena, you promised me you'd tell me how you're shipwrecked.
I was drunk. I thought the reefs around the Wounded Coast were made of candy.
Oh, come on.
And a demon told me to do it. It bet me 60 sovereigns and a bottle of port. You're not the only one here who can bullshit, you know?
What does that have to do with anything? It's not like they were having some conversation where she asked him something and he lied, so she lies back. It's just very out of place, and it makes her personality feel a little too strained. I do get what they were going for, especially when she talks to Meryl about having to work twice as hard as a man to get respect, but it's a bit hard to take her seriously when she's almost constantly talking about fucking everything around her that moves. And maybe that's the point to her. She was introduced during a time when a lot of gamers were rising up and making fun of overtly sexual women in video games, calling them all sorts of names, giving them shit for being nothing but two-dimensional eye candy. And this was almost a counter-argument from BioWare. A kind of, yeah, she's supposed to be this way, but it's her choice and she's leaning into her sexual nature to get ahead and achieve her goals. So yeah, a lot of her character is abrasive at times, but it's wholly intentional and meant to prove that someone who embraces their lustful side can have a valid and deeper reasoning for it. And oftentimes she's just goofing off and having fun. Life seems to be a big party to her, and Isabella's just enjoying it how she can. She's a very solid character, and a lot of her antics wind up affecting the game in a much larger way than you would expect from her initial introduction, making her one of my favorites overall. Sebastian is, likable, I suppose. I mean, he's just really inoffensive and tends to be pretty polite with Hawk, so it's kinda hard to dislike him until the end of the game, but we'll get to that. As with Shale being the DLC companion in Origins, there really isn't a lot of depth here to justify Sebastian being part of the main cast, and is more of a bonus person to hang around with. Being part of the Chantry, the guy takes the church's values to heart and always looks for a way to help people. But weirdly enough, the dude was forced into the Chantry by his mom and dad when he was a rebellious kid. Now you would think, oh boy, a rebellious child forced into a church setting. He's gonna hate the church. But Sebastian's just like, yeah, I didn't like it at first, but then I did. Good for him, I guess. He's just a really honest individual, and it makes him pretty boring compared to the rest of your other companions. He's stoked that he gets to be part of Hawk's adventures, and is grateful to him for helping out his family's murderers. But that's really it. The whole encounter with the Desire Demon did take a bit of a toll on Sebastian, seeing as the demon made him realize that part of him wanted to become the ruler of his bloodline when he was younger. He had two older brothers who would have been in line for the crown, but since they were killed, the crown is technically his now in the worst way possible. But after seeing his family's former friends turn on them by gaining power from a demon, Sebastian has no desire to rule. And you can direct him to seize the crown anyway or to rededicate himself to the Chantry, which is obviously what he wants. But that's really all there is to the guy. I'd be hard-pressed to continue to try to break down a character that isn't there. I think one of the biggest issues I have with Dragon Age 2 companions is that all of them are these paragons of good. Your sister is obviously a good person. Varric is the storyteller, so it makes sense for him to be the good guy. Anders merged with the literal spirit of justice. Aveline has always been a good guy guard type. Meryl is naive and is probably the closest to neutral, but she's still ultimately good. Sebastian is Sebastian. Even Fenris and Isabella, who have backgrounds that could steer them more towards being bad, are good people who want to help others ultimately. And that one-note kind of writing does get a bit stale when you compare these companions to Origins. I mean, we had Sten, who's the bastion of embracing the Qun no matter what the cost, even if you can tell that he does faintly have a good heart. We had Zevran, who will literally betray you if you don't win him over. We had Ogren's bumbling ass, the epitome of chaotic neutral. We had Morrigan, who's as selfish as they come and doesn't give a shit about 99.99% of the population. We even had the opportunity to replace one of the few wholly good people with one of the main enemies from the game. And all of that was so interesting. It was a fascinating mesh of people who came together despite their own self-interest and worked as a team to save Ferelden. But Dragon Age 2 is just good guy, good guy, good guy. And I'm not saying that they can't be interesting because they're all good people at heart. I'm just saying that happening to track down the most righteous people in a single city makes for much more cliché moments, and causes a lot of their personalities to overlap at some point or another. Most of the overall character progression falls flat, with the outliers being Varric, Isabella, and Aveline, and maybe a little Fenris. The rest aren't interesting because of who they are as much as they're interesting because of what they are, which is what I found myself mostly talking about when breaking them down. It's a really tough thing to pinpoint because I wouldn't say that I hate any of them. I just don't think that most of them are enough. Either way. So moving over to the main quests of Act 2 has us continuing a secondary quest from the previous act. I didn't talk about it, but someone's been running around murdering women. We'd never figured out who it was, but we did at least rule out some people. Now the Templar who we worked with is certain that it's a nobleman, which he reported to both his superiors and the town guard. Both factions didn't find any evidence after searching his place and were embarrassed, but the Templar is still insisting that the nobleman did it. So he sends in Big Hawk and his wrecking crew to see what's what. Again, we're visiting a nobleman's estate, one which has been searched by two factions of law enforcement already. We're not rolling up on a gang hideout or spelunking through a cave system, but immediately upon setting foot in this place, there are fucking demons everywhere. Like, unless this guy rigged up a home defense system of demons at night to prevent intruders from stealing from him, he has no reason to suddenly have loads of monsters here, seeing as his name was already cleared. The issue here is that the devs wanted to make sure that the player isn't bored, and has some combat to keep them sated, but wants to do so without making the guard force and Templars look like incompetent buffoons. So when we get to the man standing over a woman who's screaming for her life, he's like, "Whoa, wait, I know what this looks like." So yeah, BioWare gets to have their cake and eat it too, and it turns out that this guy was using blood magic to track down the real killer who murdered his sister a while back. Of course, you can choose not to believe him and just blow him out here and now, which has an effect on the next quest. I did that in my first playthrough, so I hear him out this time and he heads off to Darktown to continue the hunt. The follow-up quest occurs later down the line when Hawk's mother goes missing. Tracking her down has the party running through the lair of the actual killer who's been stalking and murdering all of these women.
Mother must be here somewhere. We need to look around. Mother must be down there. Mother! I know this locket. It belongs to Mother. She almost looks like Mother.
I wonder if we'll find more than just a sack of bones this time.
Now, I accidentally went through this entire thing without talking to the guy who I spared, meaning that I get to the killer and kill him and that's it. But after reloading, I track down the guy I spared and have him lead us to the murderer's lair. Turns out that the murderer didn't kill this dude's sister at all and instead was his former student.
You'll let me be part of this. You'll teach me the secrets of necromancy.
What? You were going to do that, right?
Yeah, there's a few different outcomes here, though none of them really matter in the grander scheme of things. But Jackass here will either fight against us if Varric isn't here, fight with us if my Hawk has chosen enough diplomatic or aggressive actions, or get gifted a new hole in his throat. No matter what happens with the student, the end result to all of this buildup over the course of 3 separate quests is that this guy has taken various body parts from different women across town and stitched them together with necromancy to recreate his dead wife. It sounded like he lopped off Hawk's mom's face, but I think he just replaced different bits on her body instead. I still don't really care about Hawk's mom. Like, I don't really have any attachment to her the same way I do a few of the companions. But I do have to award points here for the shock of seeing this Frankenstein's monster treatment of her. That was definitely a pretty gruesome twist. Though it also seemed like we probably could have prevented it like 20 different times, in 20 different ways. But again, we're kind of on a railroad of a plot line. All I'm saying is that if it had been Aveline or Meryl, this whole quest would have been like a knife to the gut rather than his mother died, that sucks. The aftermath has Hawk breaking the news to his deadbeat uncle and then being comforted by whoever his top love interest is. The whole string of quests were fine in their own right, but I still feel like the presentation to this little saga was just lacking. You have these random women who the player has zero attachment to getting murdered. You have a bunch of dead ends, but not enough familiarity with any of the suspects to make the lead up to those dead ends interesting. And yet the whole span of these 3 quests is spread out between 2 acts, which should give the player plenty of time to get to know some of these people. Instead, the big heart-wrenching moment is supposed to be Hawk's mom becoming a victim in all of this. But honestly, even she's had way too little meaningful dialogue for it to really matter to me. The big ideas here with the twists are good, but none of these smaller details are written well enough for me to care. You could have had it so that the killer was someone who Hawk had gotten to know throughout his time in Kirkwall. A particular merchant with a fun personality, a bartender who always chats with Hawk when he's around, a seemingly diligent knight who's pretending to try to track the killer while giving Hawk false clues. You could have had it so that one of your companions looks like the killer for a bit. Evidence gets planted in Aveline's office, or a lock of hair from one of the victims shows up in Meryl's home. But even without that stuff, it feels like everything is so isolated. Quest 1 is about this guy who looks like the killer because he hates his wife, but we pardon him. Quest 2 is about this Templar who's sure that the nobleman is the killer. And Quest 3 is about the killer himself, finally. We knew nothing about this guy before this. No sinister notes, no possible motives, no clues as to what he's looking for in the women that he kills. And then suddenly, all at once, there are these notes everywhere, and he leaves a blood trail to his fucking house, and he speaks like an anime character about his motives like we should have known it was him all along. It just doesn't feel like any of this flows and meshes together to the caliber that it should. And ultimately, that causes this entire string of missions to fall flat in a way that feels like these should have all been secondary quests. Heading into our initial task of dealing with the Kunari has the Arashok telling us that a dwarven merchant got a little greedy and wound up trying to steal the Kunari recipe for black powder. What the dwarf doesn't know is that the recipe that he really stole was a decoy to create a poisonous gas that sends people into a berserk frenzy, causing them to turn on their allies before succumbing to the toxin. Which, I mean, I guess yeah, it's a good recipe for a decoy, but couldn't you have just made a recipe that didn't actually do anything? I don't know why it had to be this very specific gas. I don't know, I guess to teach them a lesson, to not steal from them, I don't know. The Kunari are not affected by this gas, which means that if the dwarf were to carelessly manufacture the poison and spread it around, it would look like the Arashok is trying to sow seeds of chaos throughout Kirkwall. Turns out that this is exactly what's happening on purpose, as the dwarf was a false lead, and it turns out that it was an elf convinced by some humans to pin this whole thing on the Kunari. Her reasoning for this was that she couldn't stand to see some of her people turning to the Kunari way, especially after her people had already been led astray by humanity. Which is ironic because even now she's being manipulated again by humanity. So after a load of fighting, we return to the Arashok, who's disgusted by Kirkwall and all of the filth that inhabit it. He claims that his people represent order, and that their assigned roles at birth keep them controlled and tidy. When he looks around this city that he's been part of for years now, he sees nothing but weakness, greed, and uncertainty. The only reason that he asked Hawk to take care of this issue was to see how capable he really is, to see what kind of person he is and why he does what he does. This leads to the Arishok revealing that there is in fact no ship on its way to pick up the Qunari, and that the Qun has demanded that he stay here to recover something that was stolen from his people. He claims that he has no resources to indoctrinate the citizens here, and that he has no interest in doing so despite his disdain with the city. This waiting for his people's object to be returned has put the Arishok in a position where he feels stuck inside of Kirkwall, growing more and more frustrated, which he displays by flipping his shit at Hawke before calming down and telling him to leave. Upon reporting back to the Viscount, it turns out that more trouble is brewing just under the surface. Apparently, a Qunari delegation was sent here to speak with the Viscount, and the discussions were actually pretty positive and peaceful. But right after this, the delegation went missing before they even made it out the front gate of the keep, only further provoking the Qunari to do something drastic. Tracking down the guardsman who might know about this disappearance leads us to a guard who claims that someone in the chantry bearing a seal from the Grand Cleric authorized this hostility towards the Qunari. This has us meeting Patrice, who was the lady who set us up with the Qunari mage situation before and definitely doesn't look cartoonishly evil or anything. Since the Grand Cleric clearly doesn't know about her meddling around the Qunari, Patrice definitely doesn't want us to discuss this with her boss, and instead redirects the party to where the Qunari delegation is being held by her right-hand Templar. It's here where Patrice throws her Templar under the bus and claims that Hawke is here to stop him. You get the option to attack or to tell this guy that you don't give a shit if they kill the Qunari. Both of these options lead to the jackass killing the Qunari and then attacking you, which I find really annoying. I know a lot of these surface level reasons seem obvious, but I'll touch on exactly why in a moment. So after slaying a small village's worth of people, the Viscount comes by to evaluate what exactly is going on here. He realizes that we're going to have to inform the Arishok no matter what, and the option to burn the body and hide the evidence comes up. This is a mistake, one that I learned in my first playthrough. But basically, if you choose to burn the bodies, the Arishok knows immediately and comments on how he's learned that you're scared enough of his wrath to try to hide the evidence. I mean, it doesn't really affect anything story-wise, but it didn't make me feel good. At this point, we have more than one reason to head over to the Arishok, seeing as the Viscount's son has now defected to follow the Qun. While this actually might have normally been seen as an act of peace, the Viscount's opponents and the general public would likely see it as a sign of weakness. And with the Arishok being the way that he is, he probably doesn't care about this sort of gesture of goodwill, if it were that. Meeting with the Arishok has him telling Hawke pretty much exactly this, that the son made a choice, that he isn't a prisoner, and that he has no interest in political conversion. He's getting angrier, claiming that he's made no threats in 4 years, and yet people are still rallying against his men. Now, to be completely fair to the other side, the Qunari are a race that have conquered almost non-stop whenever they arrive in a new territory. It's hard to blame people for being fearful, but at the same time, 4 years of remaining completely idle should be enough, you would think. It's a difficult situation regardless, but I empathize with the Arishok here. Either way, he tells us that Patrice has met with the Viscount and his son to talk things over. Bumbling into the chantry has you finding the Viscount's son dead, and Patrice trying to pin the blame on Hawke, so that people will think that he was working with the Qunari and rebel against them. The Grand Cleric sees through this, and strips Patrice of her rank before a Qunari just domes her. The Grand Cleric doesn't seem to have an issue with this at all, which always kinda seemed weird to me. You can have Patrice spared of this fate if you side with her earlier and help her to frame the Qunari for the Viscount's son's death. But the Grand Cleric will still strip her of her rank, she just won't die after. Either way. So now there are 2 final problems to deal with in Act 2. First off, Isabella has located the relic which she's been hunting for this whole time. She claims that she needs to get it now or she'll be killed. On the other hand, Aveline states that 2 fugitives have converted to the Qun in order to hide from their punishment, meaning that if other criminals tried the same thing, the city won't be able to punish crimes anymore. If you choose to go with Aveline before helping out Isabella, you won't be able to do Isabella's quest and she'll leave your party permanently. Guess that makes this decision easier. So this entire time throughout the game, whenever you tried to enter the Qunari compound with Isabella, she would leave.
An awkward time to run off, Isabella.
You know I'd never leave you. It's just that I really have to leave. Now.
Obviously, something was going on here, but it's a lot more something than you might expect, seeing as Isabella is the reason why the Qunari ever came here and are still here. The relic that she was sent after wasn't just a random piece of treasure, it was a holy book of the Qun. You can demand that she return the book or tell her that you'll let her keep it. But it doesn't really matter because she takes off during the ensuing fight and leaves a note telling you that she's gone for good. And now it's time to hit the apex of Act 2. The Arishok isn't going to give up those fugitives, and this whole encounter leads to his breaking point. Basically, the two small elves who Aveline is after killed a member of the guard after that guard forced himself on their sister. When they tried to report the guy repeatedly with no results, they took matters into their own hands. This is a tough one because I get why Aveline would insist that they went too far by taking the law into their own hands, but I also completely get why they did it. The Arishok sees him as members of his flock now, and insists that as long as Isabella keeps his book away from him, he can't just sit in the city any longer without trying to fix its rampant ongoing issues. So he orders his men to attack, and the Qunari begin marching on Kirkwall. It's a great scene, and it really makes all of this tension boiling over feel fulfilling in a way. So obviously we've got plenty of fighting to do on our way from Lowtown to Hightown. There are loads of Qunari, elven supporters, and even a few Carta boys sprinkled into the mix. Along the way, we meet a Grey Warden delegation that Bethany would have been part of if she succumbed to the Blight earlier. We also meet Knight Commander Meredith, who looks like a weathered Red Riding Hood. And finally, we meet the first enchanter of the Circle along with Bethany, who was dead or almost dead for a moment before being rezzed. Even Hawk is like, "Ah, you're here, huh? Be careful guys, we don't want to have Hawk and his sister seem like they love each other too much, come on." Both of these factions are introduced at the end of Act 2 because they're going to be the main factions that we follow around during Act 3. From here you can choose to follow the Templars or the Mages, but a diplomatic Hawk will get to choose to lead instead, which has him choosing to lead the Templars or the Mages. Hell yeah, what a reward! So a bit more fighting later and we wind up at the Viscount's Keep, where the Viscount greets us by having his head removed from his body by the Arishok. If Hawk has earned the Arishok's respect, he'll speak to him. If he hasn't, there's a bit more fighting before the actual talk. And if Isabella was friendly enough towards Hawk, she'll return with the book in hand to give to the Arishok, which cements her as a less selfish person than she lets on. The whole thing winds up in one of three ways. Either you give up Isabella to be taken by the Qunari permanently and the Arishok leaves the city peacefully, or you and your party fight everyone in the room, or you fight the Arishok in a one-on-one duel to the death. And this is the biggest issue with these outcomes that I'll talk about in a lot greater detail in the summary. All of these options are basically the same thing and have no real effect on Act 3. The Qunari don't repair relations with Kirkwall if they leave peacefully. And how you kill the Arishok doesn't matter to the city's people. The actual 1v1 option only puts the worst parts about Dragon Age 2's combat on display, as you're no longer positioning people in your party and getting them to focus on certain battlefield elements and are instead clicking the same guy repeatedly for about 2 minutes straight. It's a horrible fight and it really takes the wind out of the game's sails after building up everything to this moment. I will say that as a mage you might have a little more fun here, but I also imagine that it would be a lot of running away. Like a lot of running away. I don't know for sure, but I imagine that you couldn't just sit there and tank hits like I could with my guy. But either way, the end of Act 2 winds up with Hawk being named the champion of the city. Act 3 begins with what you'd probably be able to guess just based off of the sudden appearance of two important characters at the end of the previous act. 3 more years pass and the Templars have taken over Kirkwall temporarily while a new Viscount is being decided on. Because of this, mage activity is being cracked down on more and more. And now we've finally hit a boiling point that the game has been alluding to for its majority. As such, the opening quest has you choosing between the Templars or the Mages, which will lead you to a different quest on each side depending on your decision. You'd hope that the game would really let you experience some different outcomes overall based off of who you side with, but that's just not something that Dragon Age 2 does at all. Alright, so side quests are still fetch quests even at the end of the game, so no need to go over those. As far as interesting secondary and companion quests go, it feels like the writers went, alright, fine, I guess we can bring in some characters from the past. Which would be a good thing if these quests were executed properly. One such quest is only available because I made Nathaniel Howe into a warden during the Origins DLC. Basically, Howe's sister is in Kirkwall looking for Hawk, and when we find her, she's panicking about how her brother went into the Deep Roads to follow the same path that Hawk did 6 years ago and hasn't returned. This quest is cool on a surface level because I like Howe as a character, so catching up with him is nice. But that's about as far as it goes. He claims that he came down to the Deep Roads because Hawk had made it further than anyone thought possible. After delving further to try to find the rest of Howe's party, we find most of them dead and take out the ensuing Darkspawn, and then that's it for the quest. There's a very brief interaction between Howe and Anders, and Howe will also remark on the architect from Awakening living if my warden spared him. But that's really it. Which is kind of sad because that was one of the few times where I was immediately invested in the characters that a quest involved. Sebastian's companion quest at least has a bit more substance to it since it brings a lot more of the Chantry's finer details into play. So to clarify the structure of the whole Chantry Circle Templar thing, the Chantry uses the Templars to keep the Circle in check, meaning that the Chantry wields the most power here. There are two official Chantry structures, one that overlooks Orlais, and the other that overlooks the Tevinter Imperium. Each of these has a leader known as the Divine, and neither of these recognize the other as part of the Chantry. Regardless, the Orlesian Divine is the one that we're dealing with here, and she sent out an envoy to assess whether or not Kirkwall needs to be marched on by the Chantry soldiers to put down potential mage rebellion. This envoy is the right hand to the Divine, and is another familiar face in the form of Liliana. Her accent isn't as French as it was before, but that seems to be the trend for a lot of Orlesians in Dragon Age 2. Regardless, it is fun to see her kicking ass again, as the place that we were supposed to meet her at was ambushed by a group known as the Resolutionists. I went into this a little bit during my Origins DLC video, but there are fraternities within the Circle which all house differing political ideals revolving around the direction that the Circle should take. One of these fraternities is called the Libertarians, which want to completely split from the Chantry's control. And the Resolutionists are the Libertarians who decided to actually go through with attempting this split at all costs. Now again, all of this information is fascinating, and really embodies the rich lore that Dragon Age does have. But it's also stuff that I dug through codex entries for. And if you ignore those entries, this quest has us talking to Liliana, who goes, "Yeah, okay, so this place is fucked. Tell the Grand Cleric to get out of the city." And then she leaves, and that's all you get out of her. Much like Nathaniel, the best parts of this game is interacting with these people who you really formed a bond with and got to know in the previous entry. But the developers almost seem to want to avoid having them play too much of a role in the sequel, which was an intentional choice that I'll talk about in the summary. Still, it really sucks to begin to feel like the game's gonna take this turn for the better and really start tearing into some of the deeper themes of Dragon Age, only for the writers to pull the rug out from under the player again and again. We do get another quest involving a third companion from the past in the form of Zevran, who's hiding from Antivan officials out near the Dalish camp. After fighting to get to him, he claims that the so-called officials are members of his former assassin outfit, the Antivan Crows. Yeah, he's still dealing with them, but he has made some progress.
I may have also killed the last 4 assassins they sent after me, and older men. Oh, and the guildmaster. In fact, if you were a crow, you might make a fortune bringing me in. You should consider a career change. No, really.
This is why I've missed nearly every companion from Origins, because they were written really well and had more to them than just being righteous at nearly every given turn. Though I guess to be fair, Zevran is pretty righteous himself, but only because of my actions from the first game. Still, for a brief moment, I felt excited to play this game, which hasn't been the case for the majority of it. I mean, come on, you and Isabella can have a threesome with the guy after all of this. Well, an off-screen threesome, but you know, shit's rad. And finally, to conclude our former companion roundup, Alistair drops by to be the king I always knew he could be.
Right, I'm Alistair. King of Ferelden. And this is Tegan, my uncle. Sort of.
I always found his face change to be a little more drastically weird, though. I mean, I guess not as drastic as Isabella, but I mean, it's still like, it's like uncanny.
So, you're a king now. Moving up in the world.
Isabella, right? You look different.
Don't we all?
But yeah, same old goofball. It's fun to talk to him and listen to what he has to say about Orlais tearing itself apart and his kingdom not doing so hot since the Blight tore it a new asshole. He says the swooping is bad line again, but I don't know, it felt like the voice actor was held at gunpoint and forced to say it.
That's right. Swooping is bad.
Either way, just a quick catch-up cameo from old Alistair here, nothing amazing. I love the guy, but it felt like they just wanted to include him to appease the fans. Beyond past characters popping up, your current companions do have their own final quests as well. Isabella finally tracks down her former boss, and is ready to put him down once and for all. This involves pretending to take her hostage, following her trail after we pass her off, and then killing the guy's guards. When all is said and done, you can choose to allow Isabella to negotiate with the guy for his ship and her complete freedom in exchange for incriminating documents that she found. Or you can just kill him. As always, it doesn't really matter which direction you go here, as Isabella is satisfied with either. The whole thing is just so damn clean. It's like the writers went, yeah, we gotta wrap this thing up, so let's get it over with. I mean, this guy has been pursuing Isabella for the entire game. I mean, you haven't seen him until now, because why would you, of course? But he forced her to go after a relic that was dear to the Qunari, and then wanted her captured or killed after she messed it up. And then it's like, oh god, so you found the slave documents. The documents of slavery. The ones I keep here in an unlocked cartoon treasure chest in the middle of the docks. Those slave documents. Well, guess I'll never bother you again, sorry about everything. Honestly, I think the reward for choosing to let the guy walk out is that he should jump or stab her later or something. Like seriously, that's how something like this should go down. Dude gets a fast one pulled on him for the 100th time by this pirate girl, and he just pulls her into an alleyway and gives her the London special. How much more impact would that have had if she either died or was seriously injured for a while because her and Hawk just decided to let this guy go here? I don't know, just added to the mediocrity sandwich that is this game's questing structure, I guess. At the very least, Isabella's romance wraps up with her inviting Hawk to travel the world with her on her ship, which you can choose to accept or deny. She admits that she was afraid of being loved, and is now ready to put herself into a vulnerable position again after years of waiting on Hawk's end. It is realistic and a sweet ending for the two should you choose to go down that route. And then they both bang in the middle of the bar with people clapping and cheering around them. Nah, they don't. Well, maybe they do. It just cuts away as always. Varric has an issue of his own, which involves him selling his brother's home after he was committed to a sanitarium. The issue is that the place is reportedly haunted, so now we have to go take care of that. This is pretty much the lesser version of the haunted orphanage quest in Origins. I feel like in the previous game, the technology wasn't necessarily there to create really fun horror-themed events that would age well, but the devs still put their hearts into it regardless. The music was creepy, the sound design was pretty well done, the little Predator Vision events were cheesy, but still kind of fun. This time around though, we got floating objects, a few ghosts, and eventually a boss fight with an ethereal golem. It was just alright, I guess. The end result has Varric discovering that the Illyrium idol had been split in two, and that one of those halves was causing this haunting. You can let Varric keep it or give it up, and I went for letting him keep it. I had him give it up the last time, but it didn't seem to make a story difference to my knowledge. It's an okay distraction, but I think the most important part to this quest is that it shows how much Bartrand means to Varric. Yeah, he talked about murdering his brother for a big chunk of the game, but Varric goes through a few emotional states while reminiscing about what his brother was like before he snapped. And you can see that there is still a bond there, whether he wants there to be or not. Aveline's gotten remarried, and is now running the guard in a way that can stand up to the Templars if need be, which is a nice little conclusion to her story. Unfortunately for her, it does lead to a bit of a hitch when the Templars get wind of a rumor that she's babying her men, and demand that she step down so that they can take control of the guard. When Hawk tells this to Aveline, she blows up like a pufferfish and demands that Hawk accompany her to check in on her husband's shift, so that she can prove that she isn't coddling him. Which is a pretty fucking flimsy excuse for a quest. I mean, her and Hawk are friends, and have been for years. The only way that this quest works out as an excuse to drag Hawk along is that if the player has chosen to be a rival to her rather than a friend. So we walk down to the docks and just eviscerate some unfortunate souls. We literally do nearly all of the work for Aveline's husband. And I know what you're thinking if you haven't played this game. Aha! This was a setup to get Hawk to take care of the route for Aveline's husband so that the accusers have proof that she is showing her husband special treatment. Nope. We go back to the person assigned to this case and we tell them, hey, Aveline's not sucking off her husband mid-patrol. And the guy's like, oh shit, for real? Huh. I guess those people in Lowtown were wrong. Yeah, sure, let's not keep things interesting by any means. I mean, imagine the bait and switch if Hawk decides to help his friend out, only to give her accusers the proof that they need to oust her from her position as guard captain. That shit would have been so much cooler. And if the player was wise to this possibility, Then declining to help would temporarily have had Aveline angry at Hawke, only to realize later that he was trying to help her out by not helping her out. So yeah, we get the same old kind of storytelling here when we track down a guard of hers who's been spreading rumors and leading a clan of little racists who all wear hoods. Actually, that is a little different, I guess. But either way, we take them out and then that's the end of that. The final bit with Aveline has her telling Hawke that she's now allowed to report back to Ferelden and reclaim her rank if she so chooses. If you're friends with her, she'll let you know that she has your back and will stick with Hawke until the end. If you're rivals, she beats the shit out of Hawke if you choose the right options. But she still claims that she'll stay no matter what, so I guess this doesn't really matter too much in the end.
Shut up, whore.
Meryl is still trying to get her shitty mirror to work while claiming that she misses her clan. Eventually, after concluding that the tool that we retrieved isn't enough to fix the mirror, Meryl comes up with the brilliant idea that she now needs to ask the original demon who told her how to cleanse the mirror with blood magic for help. Pretty much every character who can talk to her about going through with this idea tells her that it's probably not a great idea. But Meryl's got that sunk cost fallacy going on at this stage, having spent years and years of her life on getting one Dalish artifact restored. So we head to the top of the mountain overlooking the Dalish camp, and find out that the demon is no longer imprisoned in the statue that it was bound to. Instead, the keeper of Meryl's clan has taken it into her so that it wouldn't possess Meryl. So we have to kill the keeper, who's just such a heroic saint, apparently, which, yeah, just give me a moment, I'll talk about this. So we step back outside, and here's the rest of the clan who came looking for their keeper. If you tell them that the keeper turned into a demon, they go, yeah, we don't give a shit, it's Meryl's fault anyway. And then you have to kill them all. Now here's something that I never mentioned about relationships in this game. So if you build up enough relationship with a companion, they'll trust Hawke. If they trust him, they'll no longer gain rivalry points for decisions that they disagree with. This has never mattered more until this stage, because Meryl will actually gain friendship if you choose the dialogue that leads to her killing her clanmates. On the other hand, if you have Hawke tell them that he'll take responsibility for Meryl's blood magic, she'd typically hate that response, but it won't lead to a bloodbath and they'll leave. So that's an interesting byproduct of choosing an option here. Potentially one of the most interesting options, actually. Now here's what I was going to say concerning the Keeper's actions involving Meryl. So Meryl is definitely unique in that she has this one constant goal to restore this mirror. And you can look at her as some evil, horrible being, but she really isn't. She's smart about pretty much every stage of this process, which is why she gets angry when Hawke calls her out or undermines her. She knows the potential price of performing blood magic, which is the reason that she asks Hawke to come with her. If she gets possessed this time, she wants Hawke to kill her there if need be. So she knew the possibility of possession was very real. And yet the Keeper does this whole song and dance about how she sacrificed herself to protect Meryl from possession. This is the same Keeper who spread rumors to other members of the clan and caused them to turn up in lynch mob fashion to tear Meryl limb from limb. And that's the really annoying part. All of this could have been prevented if the Keeper was actually a wise character like she's supposed to be. She may have known that Meryl was confident and that she knew what she was doing with blood magic, but she didn't trust it. And to be fair to her, that's a smart stance to take given the history of that school of magic. But the Keeper's behavior is erratic for most of the game. She tells Meryl that the clan misses her, and then spreads rumors about her being a monster. She invites her to join the clan again, but then puts her down for her desires to restore the mirror. And then at the end of all of this, the Keeper sacrifices herself for the good of Meryl, but doesn't consider the idea that she riled up the rest of the clan against Meryl and what that would look like after she died by the outcast's hand. Nice wisdom you have there. Kinda makes sense that telling Meryl that the Keeper was stupid is the friendship choice here when you consider all of that, huh? When all is said and done, Meryl stands crying in front of the mirror that she sacrificed everything for, lamenting the loss of her dumbass Keeper. Or her clan if you let her go through with that one. She does realize that this wasn't her fault, which I kind of agree with. Yes, Meryl is definitely overzealous when it comes to what she's willing to do to preserve her people's history. And yeah, she's done some stupid shit to help accomplish her goals. But she didn't cause this, and she took every preventative measure possible to ensure that no harm was done. Obviously, she's still hurt by the events that happened, and she has every right to be. Her last question to Hawke is what she should do with her life from now on. If you've romanced her, you can choose to ask her to stay with him, but I decide to leave her life up to her. which is a bittersweet note to end on for the elf. Fenris actually has the most interesting gift-giving scene in the game, seeing as his gift relates to the Tevinter Imperium. This is another fascinating Dragon Age faction that I haven't really delved into, but are ever present throughout these games. I won't go into the place's history, but I will say that Fenris describes a lot of its quirks and inner workings very well. He claims that the Tevinter version of the Circle actually rules over its Chantry and Templars, and that the more powerful a mage, the higher they rise in the Senate. This usually means that they resort to blood magic to gain more power, and that they use that power to enforce a kingdom that endorses and even encourages slavery. One province in the Imperium outlawed slavery, only to find its ruler assassinated not long after. Slave rebellions happen all of the time, but it hardly matters when the Imperium simply crushes them with their powerful mages. It's a really fun bit of trivia to hear out of the former slave, and it really only further cements the reason why he is the way that he is. There's also a bit more out of Fenris about how powerful the Qunari are, and how they could simply crush the Tevinter Imperium if they wanted more than the one island that they invaded and took control of, which is scary. Man, Dragon Age has some good lore. I really wish this game drove further into it than it does. But in terms of what actually happens with Fenris, it was revealed by his former master's assistant that he has a sister that he had forgotten about. In the third act, he pursues this lead, but is worried about it being a trap. When he arranges to meet with his long-lost sister, she greets him with his real name before revealing that she sold him out to his former master in exchange for a chance to become a Tevinter mage. After slaughtering wave after wave of Imperium fighters and demons, Fenris finally kills his former master before turning on his sister. You can actually choose whether or not to stop him. If you do stop him, she reveals that Fenris actually volunteered and competed with other slaves for the opportunity to gain his lyrium tattoos. If you don't stop him, well...
finish her!
When all is said and done, Fenris feels more alone than ever. Hawke can remind him that he has friends in the ragtag group of companions that have cobbled together over the years, and then help him to pull himself together. It's a good ending to the vengeance-fueled character, and it feels like this is the beginning of a long healing process and a journey of self-discovery for the former slave. Anders' final quest has the mage deciding that after all of this time, he no longer wants justice to be part of him. So he's been looking into a bit of Tevinter research, which has us collecting something called Drakestone and a shit and piss crystal, which I'm actually not lying about for once.
It's a crystal that forms from concentrated manure and urine.
Ew.
After seeking these holy relics out, Anders wants Hawke to distract the Grand Cleric, but won't say anything more about it. Yeah, he's actually not trying to separate justice, if that's not obvious at this point. Afterwards, if your friendship is maxed out, you'll stumble upon a scene where Anders is trying to give Varric a pillow that his mother knitted for him, which Varric rejects. It's very clear that Anders is about to do something extraordinarily rash, and he doesn't want to tell anyone what it is until he does it. He thanks Hawke for being a good friend, which is the same thing that he did with Varric just before this. The only thing that he tells Hawke about his quest to separate justice is that he can't manage to do it since Anders' hatred for Templars has warped justice into a spirit of vengeance, which is what the writers were trying to get at with the quest where he was about to kill an innocent mage. This whole thing is frustrating because, again, the writers are railroading the player into their single narrative. Any normal person would go, wait, what the fuck are you going to do? You need to tell me because it sounds like you're going to do something horrible and I need to know. But Hawke can only ask Anders and get the reply of, you don't want to know, with no further inquiries. Beyond all of the companion and former companion quests though, there really isn't too much more to talk about outside of the main stuff. It's just the same sort of repetitive questing in the same exact areas that you've been to over and over at this stage. The mine that you half own is destroyed by a high dragon, which is an okay fight that has the dragon spewing fireballs at your squad, which doesn't do a great job at running away unless you manually toggle them to do so. By the way, fighting at this stage either looks like this, or this. Okay, so we're at a juncture here where I can just get this over with or I can make this video longer. I have access to the DLC, but I'm at this point where it feels like the game is just wasting my time so frequently that I just want to end it. Like, I just keep running into these filler quests where nothing noteworthy happens. I'm in the same damn areas over and over, and the fights are constant and repetitive. I've never played the DLC and thus I have no attachment to it, but I looked up some tentative non-spoiler reviews and both of them have outstanding scores, with most people stating that they're worth playing in their own ways. So, here we go, I guess. Let's start with Legacy, which is described as a look into the Hawke family's past. As such, I get to bring Bethany with me since she's part of the family on a technicality. That technicality being that she's Hawke's sister.
The brother and sister both. You're here together. You've come!
Is he referring to you and me?
Nah, I think he's talking about the dwarf and pirate lady. So Legacy has Hawke and his sister being hunted by the Carta very suddenly. I know I mentioned them a little bit earlier, but the Carta is the Dwarven Mafia if you want to simplify things. Varric explains that his contacts had no idea that this sect of the Carta were out here, and that the busted up Merchants Guild wagons only further leans into the strange nature of these attacks, seeing as Carta never attacks the Merchants Guild. Running through this brand new desert area has us running into these guys who are stoked that we're here. They claim that Hawke's father did something vague to them, and now they want Hawke and Bethany's literal blood because of it. They also seem to be ever so slightly out of their minds, and look like they've been sucking down some spawn goo, so there's definitely more going on than the typical Carta business. The setting to this place is actually pretty cool and interesting to look at, which really only twists the knife concerning how repetitive the vanilla game's environments are. Even BioWare has multiple viewpoints throughout the DLC where they go, eh? Eh? See, we can still design cool shit to look at. Delving further into this layer has you finding written clues about these guys wanting the Hawke's blood for a ritual. Eavesdropping on one of the conversations between two of these Carta members reveals that some of them hear voices of something or someone they call the Master, which also seems to trigger like every environmental dialogue between you and your companions back to back for some reason.
I'm surprised you agreed to come, Varric. You hate being underground, and you avoid the Carta the same way you do the Merchant Guild.
There's no way I miss watching you make these motors smuggler's cry.
When you tell people about our escape from Lothering, why do you make it sound like I had food all over my face?
You're larger than life, Hawke. I have to give you a few falls just to make you approachable.
Did you just call me fat?
Yes, that's pretty much how I get it. Hawke rolled into the fray like a gigantic pudding covered in gravy. It's more dramatic that way.
I'm not sure what I'd get this tale.
Everyone. I hope you told Bodan where you were going. If we never come back, maybe someone will send a search party after their champion.
Watch out. The ground looks treacherous here.
Thank you.
I just don't want to see your brains dashed on the ground, that's all. Stop looking at me like that. I shouldn't have said anything.
Is this the perk you get for being champion?
Eventually we run into a dwarf who explains that these guys are all like this because, yeah, they've been gulping down Darkspawn lean. Varric has an extensive conversation with this dude, seeing as he was never cultish like this before and was actually the creator of Varric's crossbow. Which, I mean, why would you ever not bring Varric with you? The game's almost tailor-made to have him quip or interact with nearly everything. I do have to say that the battles in this DLC involve some of the smartest and most interesting enemy placement in the entire game. In the vanilla game, there were definitely moments where you could see the semblance of a troop formation that made sense. Archers and mages in the back, melee boys in the front lines. But oftentimes battles tended to be a chaotic mess of enemies crawling down from rooftops or jumping out of pits or whatever. Legacy does a really good job at having archers firing down at you from battlements that you have to navigate around while melee fighters get in your face. There was even an instance where a load of hardy dwarves stood in the way and blocked us off from a mage that was non-stop slinging spells our way. A mini-boss wound up downing Hawke for the first and only time in the entire game when I played it, when he ran over and pulled a trap lever to send saw blades up from the ground. And this all made me realize that the rest of this game's combat doesn't have anywhere close to this amount of intricacy with its enemy placement or behavior, which might have been a big reason why I found it so repetitive. When we down the mini-boss, Hawke picks up a sword that seems to emit some kind of spell directly into his body.
I can feel it inside me!
Flinging ourselves even further into this pit has the game doing something that I haven't felt for a long time now. It's building intrigue. The entire time there are mentions of this master by name. Reading various codex entries spells out exactly what it is, a thinking, talking, and powerful darkspawn that dates all the way back to the First Blight. Its name is Corypheus, and the Grey Wardens locked it down here to study it. The prison itself was built over 1,000 years ago and was constructed with blood magic in mind. By utilizing a particularly powerful spell that saps the lifespan of a blood mage, the entire prison is built to be a one-way death trap. Basically, anyone can bypass the various barriers, but no one can leave once they enter. The wardens then spread some rumors about bandits and monsters roaming the area to keep innocent bystanders away from the prison. A warden who's been down here for God knows how long and has lost around 80% of his mind explains to you that the sword that we found is a key that breaches the seal towards the heart of this prison, while relaying that the key only works for the Hawk bloodline. The key unlocks the seals but can only be used by a Hawk, meaning that we're getting closer to freeing this Corypheus from the depths below. This entire process of obtaining information, moving to a ring of well-thought-out fighting, discovering genlocks which are much beefier than their previous iteration, blowing out mini-bosses which guard the seals, and upgrading the sword with a choice of an attribute is just so damn cool. It really feels like a contained dungeon crawl that has cool sights and interesting lore implications. I can't stress how impressed I am with everything this DLC has brought to the table so far. And it's crazy how night and day the difference is here between it and the vanilla game. Throughout the first 2 floors of this 5-floor prison, you also hear and see these little visions depicting part of why Hawk's dad was involved with all of this. I don't know if they were intentionally left here as a diary to the Hawk siblings, but I don't see why they would be. I guess the answer is just magic or something. But these glimpses into the past showed that Hawk's father imprisoned powerful demons within multiple magical barriers as part of a deal to allow him to leave with his wife and firstborn. This imprisonment is expanded on later by a group of wardens who came down here, who claimed that Hawk's father made his way to the prison to strengthen the seals on Corypheus, which is something that needs to be done every here and there by someone who isn't a warden. It isn't anything earth-shattering, but it does actually do more to ground Hawk as a person in this universe more than even Bethany or his mother did, at least in my opinion. But more importantly, Kirkwall itself is thought to have been influenced by this Corypheus, who seems to be so powerful that even his dreams have affected people's minds. Obviously, this has been seen directly in the dwarves who have been hunting Hawk, but the implication here is that Kirkwall has had a history of violence and blood magic because of Corypheus's dreams. And I love this progression a lot, because you start out by thinking, okay, crazy cult of dwarves want us. Alright, they have a boss. Okay, the boss is a darkspawn, who cares? Oh, this darkspawn seems pretty strong. Oh shit, it's like a human and a darkspawn merged. Oh, and it has godly powers. The threat level keeps getting ramped up with every scrap of new information, and it's really fun to have my expectations grow over time. Floor 3 is when things start to get a bit more poisonous, as dwarven structures are seen melting all around you. The only minor complaint that I have about the DLC at this point is that the Darkspawn ogres are pretty much just outscaled by the new types of Darkspawn. The Shield Boys and the Alphas are much tougher enemies than ogres, which were some of the toughest units in Origins. I don't know, it just strikes me as odd, I guess. So that crazy old warden from before, Larius, was actually one of the warden commanders a while ago. And he's been leading us on this goose chase while explaining as best he can what's going on with Corypheus. At the end of floor 3, the other group of wardens make their appearance, and a decision has to be made. Either you stick with Larius, who claims that these new wardens were the ones who sent the Carta after Hawk and have had their minds affected by Corypheus, or you team up with the new wardens who are led by one named Janica. I know in pretty much every other language it would be Janica, but they pronounce it Janica. So, it's Janica, I guess. These new wardens claim to want to use Corypheus's power to control the Darkspawn and prevent further blight, which is exactly what the idiots who built this prison wanted to do and failed at. Larius, on the other hand, just wants Corypheus dead once and for all, which I definitely agree with. Choosing a side causes you to pop out onto either floor 4 or 5, not that you ever see the one that you missed. I decided to do both because I'm actually having fun with this. Janica's path is a short 6-minute stroll through a labyrinth of Larius's making. It's revealed through dialogue here that Janica is really arrogant, and her claiming the power of Corypheus is not going to be good at all. She did hire the Carta, who listened to her commands and were sent after Hawk because she didn't think to simply ask him for help. Larius's path, on the other hand, is a bit more tricky, and involves connecting 2 streams of energy together. I'm sure there's a formula here, but I kinda just started making stuff go all over the room and somehow snaked it around to connect to the other stream, and it was just pretty easy, but I'm sure there's a formula. I mean, I could have fucked that up, I guess. I admit that I didn't fully explore Janika's side of things because I intended to choose Larius as my final decision, but I did find some papers on Larius' floor indicating that the more powerful a mage has gotten, the more easily they're influenced by Corypheus' whispers. So it is entirely possible that Janika's being a complete dickhead because she's more or less being mind-controlled here. The end of either path dumps you out at the apex of the prison, where Corypheus lies in wait. You can actually choose to defect to the side that you didn't choose before, though there is a key bit of dialogue here that you only get if you chose Larius at first. No matter what happens here, the side that you didn't choose winds up dying, not that I'm super attached to either. Honestly, watching Larius' wrinkled ass charge Janika and slam her like he's in the octagon was hilarious.
You're fast, like a mangy, blighted little mongoose.
I have never been called that.
But if you do pick Larius at first, Janika will tell you that the former Warden commander threatened the life of Hawke's mother in order to persuade his father to get involved with all of this, making Hawke's involvement with all of this directly Larius' fault. Regardless of what you choose, Hawke unleashes Corypheus, who turns out to be one of the Tevinter Magisters who unleashed the Blight onto the world. I believe I touched on this vaguely in my Origins video, but basically 7 Tevinter Magisters became a little too obsessed with power and thought to reach the seat of God by opening a rift into the Fade with blood magic. Using this rift, the Magisters achieved their goal of breaching the walls of the Golden City, said to be a location where a god or gods existed depending on who you asked. A lot of the details are obviously lost to time and are iterated on differently from religious group to religious group. But the stuff that's pretty objective is that some mages got a little too big for their britches, went after godlike power, and paid the price by being twisted into the world's first darkspawn, unleashing the Blight onto the world. It's a tale that's been mentioned here and there by these games in codex entries by particular NPCs and in the opening scene of Origins. But I didn't think that the writers were interested in continuing to expand on it with Corypheus here in Dragon Age 2, seeing as they hadn't touched on the subject much at all in the vanilla game. It's pleasantly surprising that they either sought to rectify this lack of expansion or that they always planned it with this DLC in particular. And I'm happy to see that this is what Corypheus is. The fight itself is, well, it looks cool. It's got some fun mechanics, but my squad here is not built to tank hits. They're pretty much all glass cannons except for Hawke. Basically, after a bit of combat, Corypheus sucks down some Phanta from the side pillars and learns how to use a new element every time. First fire, then rock, then electricity and cold. And what you have to do is activate each of the pillars, fight off some demons, and then jump back into fighting the boss. I tried to play by the rules of the fire festival here, but I couldn't get my squishies to avoid the fire, even when I tried to pull them out of it manually. So I just face tanked the entire fight with Hawke, which felt a little stupid. It also took like 20 minutes or something. I did decide to repeat the fight after beating Corypheus the first time just to try to see if I could keep everyone else alive, and it wasn't as bad when I ran towards the fire to take as little damage as possible when it got close. Combined with tactical potion usage, I got through the second fight in less than half the time that it took me the first time. Apparently the potions caused the user to become invincible immediately and for the entirety of the drink animation, at least during this fight, which I didn't realize until I pulled Varric through some fire by chugging. But either way. The outcome here doesn't seem to matter too much in terms of bringing along Larius or Janika, but I'm almost certain that Corypheus transfers himself into the survivor and walks off with their body, seeing as each of them talk differently afterwards, and neither reported back to the wardens despite them saying that they would. I don't know anything about Inquisition, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Corypheus show up there. When all is said and done, Hawke and Bethany talk about what their father was like and how much they miss their parents and all of that before Bethany calls Hawke brother with a soft A and not a hard R. She takes her leave and Hawke imagines what his mother might have said about this whole situation. It's all supposed to be very touching, though again, I just didn't see these characters interact enough in a meaningful way that made me fully care about their relationships. Yeah, you can just fill in the blanks and picture them as a loving family, but I have no draw personally to the sibling's mother or Bethany herself. So I guess I personally would have liked to have seen Hawke discussing this whole ordeal with the companions that he brought along, since I do have a much deeper connection to them. Either way, Hawke opens his eyes and dismisses away his mother and her gigantic rack, And that's the conclusion here to Legacy. Overall, fantastic addition to the game. I wouldn't even bother re-summarizing everything just because I think my thoughts were pretty well noted throughout the DLC. But I do have to say again that I really think that this expansion of content hurts the vanilla game's writing by comparison even more with how well it tied the second game to established lore. And while I do still really appreciate the focus on Act 2's Kunari and the culture surrounding them, I really wish the whole game didn't seem to amount to a very contained tale about Templars versus Magi. But because of Legacy, I do have high hopes for Mark of the Assassin, which we'll hit next. The whole thing starts off with another BioWare game taking a real-life human being and creating a video game character based around them. Well, actually, I suppose this game did it first before Mass Effect 3's Diana Allers. I know some people despise this kind of insert, but I don't really care myself as long as the role that person fills makes sense. Felicia Day plays the role of Talus, who's an elven assassin that immediately looks much different than all of the other oddly shaped elves in the rest of the game. She interrupts an ambush on Hawk, fights with him, and then says, "Hey, you wanna go rob a nobleman?" Hawk apparently has literally nothing better to do and decides to accompany her to this duke's estate.
Here's the problem. The heart is in a vault, behind who knows what kind of traps.
So let me get this straight. I'm somewhere that's not what I would call Earth.
Protected by a private army of Orlesian chevaliers. All inside a fortress that was designed to be impregnable.
I'm seeing freaking dragons.
And let's not forget, it's on the side of a mountain, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by monsters.
Oh yeah, I'm feeling it now, Mr. Krabs. This is gonna be a shit show, isn't it? Alright, I'm gonna try to take this seriously. So the plan is to participate in a hunt by the Duke here. If we can bag ourselves a Wyvern, that would be ideal. Oh yeah, everyone says Wyvern in this game, but I've always pronounced it as Wyvern. Whatever. So we go around this big forest area and nab random side quests that aren't anything special. An altar with spirits haunting it, 2 dogs that are missing, a scholar lost in the woods, just kinda stuff to do. There are some new enemy types in the form of these little goofballs called ghasts, which aren't anything super special, but new enemy types are always welcome in my book. I guess they're supposed to be funny. I didn't find them funny. But the main thing is that the writing is very lighthearted, which is fine, but it's one of those things where a lot of it grates on me or makes me roll my eyes.
Is that wyverns mating?
Could we mimic that?
No. Oh, the sound. Right, yes. I can try that.
Looking for clues.
Ooh, nug bones. I wonder if a nug call would help attract a wyvern.
You know a nug call?
You go elbow deep in wyvern shit, and I'm the weird one? Well, maybe inherited is the wrong word. What do you call it when you kill someone in order to get all their stuff?
Murder.
Profitable murder, maybe.
Yeah, it's, something. It doesn't make me laugh, but it probably makes someone... Okay, this is just me talking myself into stating that the Big Bang Theory is probably funny to some people. Talus is here to stay, so you kinda have to roll with it. I figured that Varric and Isabella were probably gonna be the 2 that were silly enough to hang with her, which means that my whole party now is 3 rogues and a warrior. So you can upgrade the Wyvern to an alpha if you find all of the clues, but I couldn't find one of them even after looking it up and said fuck it. It only really leads to better loot at the end, which I don't particularly need at the moment. The attempt at humor only continues as an Orlesian jumps the squad because we took his kill.
This wyvern was mine to kill, not yours. Mine! 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 I will not accept such talk from a backwater mongrel.
You do realize Hawk can beat you like a rented mule with both hands tied behind his back.
It's like a fan fiction. It's funny though because this whole thing is supposed to be this quirky adventure, and it clashes with the tone of Legacy so hard that I'm getting whiplash. With Legacy, there was this solid indicator that the Hawk family really has something going for it, and that the remaining siblings will always share a bond with their deceased parents. In Mark of the Assassin, Hawk claims that his mother wanted to throw coins into a well because that's what rich people do, implying that her desires were ridiculous. But enough about the tone of the writing. Well, at least I'll do my best to curb my criticism of it.
Champion, what a surprise. Seneschal, dear, introduce me to your delicious friend.
Awkward.
My, what a big sword you have. Can I interest you in some Antivan olives? Or I have some smoked ham from the Androfels. They say it tastes of despair.
Wait, does it really? How can ham taste like despair? Why would anyone eat it if it did?
Alright, so first we gotta break into the manor here. That requires a lot of talking to people that are joke after joke, but we finally managed to snag a key to get in. After busting in with only Talus, she kills a guy and gets all upset because she really has a heart of gold and doesn't want to kill people, and she's just so likable, oh my gosh. Then we have ourselves a stealth mission, which I'm actually all for in terms of mixing up mechanics. Unfortunately, it's pretty shallow mechanically, with no consequences whatsoever for failing. You stick to the shadows, throw rocks to distract, and knock out guards from behind, but there's really only a single path with a single option every time. I admit that I asked for something like this in Liliana's DLC for Origins, but I guess I was hoping for something with a little more spine. Disguises, an option to run or slide, maybe something like a smoke bomb for emergencies, but I guess it's not the worst attempt at a stealth mission either, so I can't really fault these guys for trying. At the end of this 15 or so minute crawl, we get cornered by the Duke's men and pull out our weapons. Remember that time in Origins where the game gave you a ridiculously tough battle to fight, and if you failed, you wound up in the dungeons? Remember how if you planned carefully and positioned people just right, you could win and not be sent there? Okay, just checking. So Hawk and Talus get tossed here into the dungeon without a fight. And here's where the completely comedic DLC tries to get serious. So Talus is a member of the Qunari, which is a religion, so it does make sense. She hasn't come here to steal a gem, she's actually come here to kill her mentor, who was supposedly leaking Qunari secrets to our legions. Hey, you know all that stuff that we learned about the Qunari through this game that built off of Sten's vague descriptions and Origins? Say goodbye to all of that, because Talus is here to throw it out the window, and probably in the most confusing way possible. So let's take a look at what we know about our temporary companion. Talus is an elven woman who was rescued from slavery when a member of the Qunari noticed her natural abilities and had her become a spy so that she could perform heists and assassinations for the Qun. Talus fucked this up constantly, and did so poorly because of her own morals getting in the way that she was demoted to a laborer. All of this is stuff that took place before this game, and was part of a live-action film starring Felicia Day, which I didn't care and don't care to watch. I'm just setting this up, so bear with me. Basically, after getting demoted, she was promoted again and given the task of tracking down a rogue Qunari mage. During this hunt, Talus battles with the idea that maybe she's a Tal Vashoth, which were the Qunari who abandoned the Qun and went their own separate way. She even again defies her orders and kills the Qunari mage instead of capturing him because she was angry that the mage killed her friend. Okay, so she's treading this path of abandoning the Qun, right? She's repeatedly disobeyed her orders, and she allows her emotions to get in the way of her judgment. So what does she do? She commits herself to serve the Qun. Now let's take a look at what we know about the Qunari. Qunari serve the Qun without question. They do what they're told because that's what they know and what's expected of them. Individuality makes no sense to their culture, and it has no place. Most cannot fathom going against the Qun in any way, and cannot grasp the concept of being their own person. This is everything that Talus has contradicted, and yet she's been snatched up, promoted, demoted, and promoted again. The Qunari have continuously given this fuck up second chance after second chance, despite her being a woman, which was something that Sten talked about a bit in Origins, stating that women have their place among the other laborers and not as warriors. While Talus isn't a warrior per se, the amount of chances that she's been given outside of the traditional roles that a woman serving the Qun fulfills has been unheard of at this stage. So you have this blatantly contradictory character locked in a cell with you, and she starts spilling all of her true motivations and secrets, right? This is a great chance to have Hawk go, whoa, wait, I actually learned about the Qunari and this is all bullshit. But every time Hawk gets a chance to call her out, she sidesteps his question and goes, look, you just don't understand the Qunari way. Talus then begins peppering Hawk with Qunari sayings and teachings, claiming that the Qun isn't as bad as he might think. The essence of what makes the Qun so interesting as a concept is the fact that it's so radically out there from anything else in this series. It preaches unity, the unquestionable and unshakable belief that there are no individuals, just the Qun. And yet we have this lady who's in a position that we've never seen out of the Qunari talking about how great they are while simultaneously trying to retain a nature that spits in the religion's face. It's absolutely mind-boggling how badly this whole thing is bungled. But let's step back into what's actually going on and hope that things get better. So Talis claims that she's here to kill her mentor because the secrets that he's going to leak will reveal other Qunari spies within the Orlesian Empire. She states that a lot of innocents will die without her intervention, and that she's here against the orders of her superiors again, who are fine with letting this guy leak these secrets. Right, okay, sure. Anyways, we're just sitting in a cell waiting for Isabella and Varric to show up, and after a while, Talis just gets up and picks the vertically raising iron gate open.
Why didn't you just do that before?
You said your friends were coming.
You ever stop to go, wait, is this joke worth it? Yeah, BioWare just doesn't do that at all here. Now, I do have to say that for all of the complaining that I just did, the next stretch of DLC is really damn fun. So you can choose to escape through a hidden tunnel, or you can loot the vaults. Or you can do both, really. Looting the vaults has a set of 3 puzzle rooms which unlock a final puzzle. We've got your standard flippy tile puzzle, and 2 rooms where you grab these color marks and use them to open different doors, while combining the colors when necessary. It's not 200 IQ stuff, but it's still pretty fun to do regardless. Plus, Isabella has a little side quest here to recover all of the different pieces that make up a legendary dagger. And it's always fun to get treasure even if it isn't actually going to help me at this stage of the game. The final puzzle takes all of the puzzles that you just solved and has you using the revealed answer key to turn off the fire in the center of the room, revealing yet more treasure. I don't know, it might seem silly, but I do love raiding video game vaults for loot, so I enjoyed this quite a lot. After all is said and done, we head through the escape tunnel, which probably would have gotten us into the innermost part of the manor immediately if we had used it. But it is called an escape tunnel, so I don't know. If only it were called an entrance tunnel. On our way out, we wind up fighting one of the Duke's guard units, and Talis gets separated by a portcullis gate. Now, I do know that Felicia Day wrote this character, but I imagine that the devs took what she wrote and put her character into these situations, right? So Talis gets cut off and the Duke's boys come out to play, and Talis takes off while shouting, "Don't worry!" Then halfway through the 10-second battle, she comes in again with her own cutscene, while exclaiming that she told Hawk that she would be back. It's like the writers here really wanted Talis to be likable, to a point where they were afraid of people thinking for a split second that maybe she abandoned Hawk. Ironically, the writing right after this does more to add disdain for Talis than anything else she does or seems to do. Yeah, we get another session of, I love the Qun, but I disobey it all the time because teehee, I'm a free spirit. It's really aggravating because I know why she's saying this, and I know what the writers were trying to impart here. To lend her side a bit more clarity, she likes being free and making jokes and goofing off, like Isabella. But she had a void in her life that she's tried to fill with the Qun. She wants to serve a higher purpose, to be part of something that unifies and looks out for its people. She romanticizes the Qunari and their way of life, looking at their acts of aggression as acts of protection for their own. And on a surface level, this does make sense, right? I love living my life, but I love the idea of joining a greater cause that looks after a community of people who have a purpose. But the biggest and most glaring issue with this is that she's not looking at a religion like the Chantry and wanting to contribute to it while being herself. Because the Chantry might have strict rules for its more devout followers, but they'll still allow people to be themselves more or less. No, Talis is looking at the Qun, the religion that assigns people roles that they can very, very, very rarely break out of. The religion that obeys without question, that restricts the very foundation, the mere concept of free will. And she wants to be a part of that in her own way, which directly contradicts what the religion stands for.
After everything you've already done, why would I help you again?
Because I've got your nose.
So the whole thing comes down to a decision where you can choose to join or leave Talis. This decision does not matter even slightly. Either you go down the mountain with her or without, but the final battle and cutscenes are almost exactly the same besides the attitude of Talis towards Hawk. To sum it up, the Duke and Talis' mentor meet up, and the mentor tosses over a list of names, which Talis explains later. The Duke always attacks Hawk on sight, which leads to a fight where he summons his Wyvern to attack the group. It's a decently fun fight, though nowhere near as complex as the one with Corypheus. Afterwards, Talis will explain in more detail that if the list was leaked, the lives of every Qunari spy along with their friends and families would be murdered by Orlais. She'll only go into detail if you chose to help her, but it doesn't really matter. What I'm more concerned with here is, well, what are these spies doing? Why would they be here? Typically, a spy can be used defensively to ensure your enemies aren't trying to attack you in some way, but they can also be used aggressively in foreign lands, right? Figure out weaknesses, find out where the best place to attack would be, and so on. Kind of fits the mantra of the ever-aggressive Qunari, right? So the main concern that Dumbass has here is that the lives of many would be lost if this list got leaked. And you're telling me that if these spies remained, it wouldn't lead to 100 times more deaths at the hands of invading Qunari? I find that hard to believe. Well, whatever. If you help Talis willingly, she's all happy and hands you a jewel as a reward. If you helped Talis begrudgingly and tell her to fuck off, she's downtrodden and hands you a jewel as a reward.
I don't know why Hawk helped Talis. I suppose she was pretty for a Qunari. I don't know why Hawk didn't kill Talis. I suppose she was pretty for a Qunari.
Nearly everything is a joke in the Mark of the Assassin DLC. Dialogue options, passive dialogue overheard from NPCs, codex entries, even quite a bit of the special equipment that you can gather have names like Anxiety. And yeah, comedy is subjective. I'm sure there are people who laugh their asses off at this, and maybe it's just not my style of humor. But let's take a brief comparison at BioWare's Mass Effect 3 Shore Leave DLC. That was also punchline after punchline after punchline, to such a goofy caliber that I was won over by the end of it. It knew what it was and lent a lot more to the game's squad mates by the end of it. Mark of the Assassin has you following around a brand new character who you have no former connection with, who's been non-stop cracking jokes like it's her job. And then suddenly, oh my god, she's a really deep character who has a backstory that makes her so unique and interesting, don't you love her now? The thing is, if Talis was integrated into the game from the beginning, I could see her blooming into someone more likable. If most of her dialogue wasn't interspersed with zingers, and the comedy routine was dialed back and refined, there might actually be a pretty sizable chance that she'd blend right in with a lot of the cast. This is especially true if she would answer the more intricate issues that she brings to the table with her association with the Qunari. If she would be willing to answer a lot of the criticism, and maybe realize that her views are a bit flawed with how she behaves, that growth could really cement her as a solid character. But I mean, the DLC is a couple hours long and apparently the writers just didn't want to get into semantics, I guess. Now I will say that there is one thing that I really appreciated about Mark of the Assassin. It helped me to learn and to understand the Qun better by tossing a very contradictory character at me. I hadn't thought this hard about the religion before this, and now that understanding has helped me to better reinforce my own opinions and thoughts about it. But that said, now that I do have that understanding, I have less of an issue with Talis being a confused character and more of an issue with her existing as she has within the confines of the most constricting religion in the game. I don't know how she's gotten as far as she has with the amount that she's directly disobeyed orders, and that plot hole really bothers me more than anything else about Talis. I don't give a shit about Felicia Day writing her, and I have no issue with her face being copy-pasted onto an elven head. What I do give a shit about is this fanfic character overriding the obstinate nature of the Qun. It bodes ill when the writers are willing to bend over backwards to include something that just doesn't make any damn sense when layered into established lore. And really, all they'd have to do is show why that perceived plot hole exists as it does. They might do that in Inquisition. But as things stand, there's so much wrong here with the mere existence of a rule-breaking elf in the service of the Qun that I can't overlook the flaws without more context. The entire DLC is a wasted opportunity to showcase the really big flaws of the Qun. To tell the story of someone who's been brainwashed into thinking that this religion that saved her isn't one of the most oppressive forces in the world. To walk her through her path of becoming Tal Vashoth, while she explains any potential upsides to the Qun. Instead, what we got was a DLC with no player agency in terms of questioning this new and in-your-face character. The outcome is the same no matter what you do, which actually harkens back to the majority of how Dragon Age 2 was written. Mark of the Assassin is targeted towards a very specific group of individuals who have a very specific sense of humor. I don't intend to attack fans of a particular type of comedy or person, and I don't even think that's an issue here. The issue to me is when you let that comedy or person overwrite an entire chunk of established lore. and when you try to mix non-stop humor with sudden serious and emotional moments. So yeah, this DLC made me angry. Goodbye.
Gaming.
Hey, I can go finish the video game now. So first up to bat are the Templars and Knight Commander Meredith. She goes, hey, I know that you publicly opposed me during the debate with the First Enchanter, but I need your help to round up some of the escaped slaves, I mean mages. And I tell her, no, I'm not doing that. And she says, Bethany. Well, guess I have no choice now. So yeah, this whole thing is like the perfect case study of how mages feel after being locked up and oppressed by Templars. One of them goes and drinks himself into a stupor and he just wants to get wasted and fuck people, stating that he's never cooked his own food, stood in the rain, or kissed a girl despite being 26. One of them wants to take care of her adopted family so badly that she gives into demons and goes crazy. And one of them seems to have been crazy for a while and winds up killing his lover. It's like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears of mage oppression. After killing 2 of them and letting the 3rd one go, that's the end of the quest. Meredith thanks Hawk before getting angry when he blames the Templars for the mages losing their shit. She claims that, yeah, sure, they could treat the mages better, but then more people could die, which is always a great argument for keeping an entire group of people locked up. All of that said, there is a fine line here which even the First Enchanter admits to. There are blood mages in the ranks of the Circle, and that's never been a good thing. I'm not a Dragon Age encyclopedia, so I'm sure that there are others out there, but Meryl has been the only case that I've ever witnessed to my knowledge of blood magic being used with no direct consequences. And that only lasted for so long before her jackass keeper decided to get involved. So when it's noted by the First Enchanter that droves of the Circle are leaving at night to attend secret meetings, well, it does call for some involvement. Also, how'd that guy never get to stand in the rain if these people could just leave at night? Either way, this is where Hawk steps in to figure out what's going on. Oh, and you get this quest from Meredith if you choose to back the Templars at the start of the act. Something that I neglected to mention is that it's been pretty evident that quite a few Templars have been assisting the mages throughout the game, seeing Meredith as a monster who only perpetuates hatred between the 2 groups. This only becomes more clear after we take out a group of hostile mages and Templars who fight you together. After the battle, one of the Templars who didn't participate in the fight claims that he didn't know that the person who was hunting them was you. You know, this is like the 4th time in this game so far where you wind up fighting a group of people and one of them comes up afterwards and is like, oh man, I don't know why the rest of those people attacked you, we thought you were someone else or something. It's like, how many times can you get away with using this excuse for a setup to a fight before it becomes apparent that BioWare just wanted you to keep fighting over and over again? Either way, I find this whole thing strange because the First Enchanter was the one who wrote you a letter and told you directly to go hunt these people down, and somehow there was still a leak that there was a hunter after them or something. I guess it must have been someone who read his letter somehow, but whatever. Oh yeah, also they kidnapped Bethany. Oh no, God, not Bethany. Anyways, the main plot is now shifting towards, hey, it's mages versus Templars, to, hey, it's everyone versus Knight Commander Meredith, at least for now. So there's that particular Templar Thrask who's been sympathetic towards mages for the entirety of the game, even in Act 1. He was the one who told Hawk about the escaped apostates, which Hawk could either then turn over to the really overzealous Templars, or he could lie and tell them that the apostates were all dead. Would you like to guess how much of this decision matters in Act 3? I'll bet you know the answer. So yeah, this Grace girl who Hawk chose to cover for wound up getting recaptured because she was too stupid to leave the Kirkwall area. She actually blames Hawk for her recapture, claiming that he should have known that she wouldn't have enough food or supplies to make it on her own. She's here now with Thrask, who's been trying to unite the mages and Templars against Meredith. When you approach this group and you say, hey, could you not tie up my sister, please? She loses her shit, kills Thrask, and then turns into a pride demon. Okay, before we get further into how stupid this plot point is, what if Hawk had turned her over to the Templar who was threatening to kill any mage who escaped the Circle? She dies. No wait, that would make sense. She just gets recaptured, and she blames Hawk. Just, you know, more directly. This is one of the worst plot points in this game because it really hammers home that nothing that you do really matters in the long term. You can't kill Grace, you can't get her killed, you can't prevent her from going through with this. And the thread of logic that makes this make sense in Dragon Age is that, she was a prideful asshole who gave into a demon, which is the easiest cop-out answer that you'll see when a mage goes bad. It doesn't matter if you directly helped her, she's too prideful, and blames Hawke and gives into a demon. The demon got her, man, there's nothing you can do, don't think harder about it. I understand that the writers are trying to convey how easy it is for a mage to feel cornered and then turn to blood magic and then eventually become a demon. It does make sense. But it feels like every time they want the plot to progress in a certain direction, they just go, well, this one just gives into a demon and now you have to kill them no matter what. Not that I'm saying that you wouldn't kill a demon, it's just the fact that it just keeps happening over and over, I guess. There was a lot more nuance with this sort of thing most of the time in Origins, at least that's how I feel about it. You'd have people showing that they want to fight back and that they aren't trying to give in. But in Dragon Age 2, people just give in left and right. Oh man, I'm really mad right now. Fucking blood mage. Oh god, that really wounded my pride. I'm a demon now. What the fuck? Which again, I know it's supposed to show how much worse the treatment of mages is in Kirkwall, but it really rubs me the wrong way because it feels like every single option that seemed like it could affect the end game just keeps getting snuffed out. I'll have a lot more to say about this later, but to clarify, people have been talking to Hawke about becoming the next Viscount, which is a thing that can happen if you choose a particular option. But others have been talking about this Thrask guy, maybe having him potentially replace Meredith or becoming Viscount himself. And now that option is just yoinked out of existence in a way that you couldn't really prepare for or try to prevent in any way. It's really obnoxious. Regardless, Meredith's men show up to question what happened here, and you can lock in whether you're siding with the mages or the Templars. I'm so tired of saying mages and Templars. The final quest of the game has the Knight Commander and the First Enchanter at it again, except this time they're gonna attack each other, I guess. You get the wonderfully complex option of joining the anti-magic people or the people who can cast spells. But not in the circumstance that you think because Anders just blows up the fucking Chantry. Yeah, he planted 400 tons of lyrium dynamite under the Chantry and blew it up. Hell yeah, that's justice, baby. Literally, that's justice. Justice was part of this. So when I was younger, I thought this scene was cool. And it is, in a I just watched something blow up sort of way. It's the reason why Transformers still exists the way it does. But this one action single-handedly destroys any good faith that anyone can and should extend to Anders in my opinion. I have to admit, it was really tough for me to look at Anders in the companion roundup without factoring in the part that he becomes a terrorist. But yeah, this just ruins a lot of his uniqueness for me. He was possessed by a spirit of justice. When you hear of mages being possessed, you always hear of demons taking control of them. Pride, wrath, sloth, lust, etc. But here was a good spirit. One who you can learn about a lot more in Origins. Seeing the concept of, for lack of a better descriptor, a more angelic spirit inserting itself into a man and using their body to fight for what's right was a really fresh and interesting idea. And yeah, sure, it winds up fusion dancing with Anders' personality to become more vengeful. But why did it have to turn into another case of crazy mage makes things worse for every other mage? It just feels like a completely wasted opportunity to me. You took two of the most unique setups for a character in a game, combine them into one super person, and what you did with that person was something that anyone with dwarven black powder could have done. You had a mage who escaped custody from the Templars 7 times, got turned into a Grey Warden, helped to fight off a really powerful army of Darkspawn, and fused with a spirit from the Fade. And you have him rush Banana and plant C4 at bomb site B on the church. It takes away from the game specifically because it is Anders. He had the potential to be so much more. His physical and emotional makeup were wonderfully complex in a very interesting way. The amount that you could do with him, something like him becoming a leader, stepping in to toe the line against injustice and the like, is pretty much unparalleled when it comes to Templar-Mage relations. And yet the apex of his actions is him doing something that anyone could have done. And that's not even counting the fact that what he did to Hawke and the people who call him their friend was absolutely horrible. He used them in his own selfish revolution, which he does no matter how well you get along with him, whether you're rivals or lovers. He robbed the chance of any average mage living in the circle of having a semi-normal life. He murdered anyone caught in the blast zone, innocent or guilty, just to further his agenda. Now, all of that said, I do think that there's something to be said about a character whose actions can invoke that much emotion out of me. Yes, his thinking was flawed. His personality became a muddled mess of, are you for or against mages? Which makes his companionship pretty one note. But I think that when you do combine his exuberant personality and awakening with what he winds up becoming, it makes for an intriguing case study about Fade spirits mixing with humans. I just don't think that this was Anders' full potential in terms of what he could have been written to be. And I would have rather seen an anonymous mage blow up the Chantry and Anders choosing to run off and join that mage when vengeance took over. Alright, so where are we at? Well, we gotta choose a side, which is a fresh concept in this game. Because Meredith decides to enact the Right of Annulment, which means that she now has free reign to kill every mage in Kirkwall. What's funny is that your sister doesn't even remotely factor into the choice here. You also can't choose to remain neutral because there are two endings, if you can call them that. It honestly would have been a lot cooler if there was an ending where the champion could choose to abandon Kirkwall and let the events play out however they would without his interference. But whatever, I chose the circle, I guess. I don't know, I chose the Templars before because of what Anders did, but there's really no right answer here at this stage. And as always, it doesn't really matter. But honestly though, the Circle didn't command Anders to do this, and they're just as much victims here. And for as standoffish as Meredith has been, you can't blame her for seeing something like this happening before her very eyes and figuring that it's time to put an end to all of this. But either way, you can choose to spare or kill Anders right now. Sebastian constantly advocates for this man's death, over and over, and if you choose to spare Anders here, Sebastian will run off and say that he is gonna go grab his army or something to hunt down Anders. It's ridiculous. It only makes Sebastian that much more unlikable. If you do spare Anders, you can simply tell him to leave or to join you. I chose to spare him, which, actually I think his response to all of this helped me to figure out my true feelings about Anders. Yes, of course, I still think that everything that I just said is true of him, but he really didn't see any other way to get what he wanted. He didn't want to hurt the people around him, he just felt like he had no other choice. It doesn't excuse his actions, but it does lend some really human emotions to his choice. He's by no means a bad character, and I will never say that he is. I just, again, think that he could have been utilized better. Regardless, we now fight our way through the city, taking out Templars and Blood Mages alike. When we make it to the gallows, we get the opportunity to talk to all of our companions once more, which all give their own little thoughts on the situation that they've been thrown headfirst into. This whole thing feels so much less eventful than the Origins finale. I don't know, man. It's pretty clear that nearly all of them are here only because Hawke is, which really cements the bond that you've built with them for this whole game. When the Templars invade, the first enchanter finally loses it and decides to turn to blood magic. And I really feel like there was no reason for this. Yes, of course there were technically a dozen reasons, with desperation being the first, second, and third motivator. But choosing to side with the mages only for the writers to basically continue to paint nearly any mage as a ticking time bomb, well, I don't know how to feel about that. I guess that's just how the world of Dragon Age seems to be, at least according to the second game onward. After taking the enchanter out, it's time to face down Meredith once and for all. This one's actually a little more interesting, as people have consistently questioned Meredith's mental state for a long time now. Well, it turns out that Bartrand sold his lyrium idol fragment to the Knight Commander, which she fashioned into a sword. It turns into a lightsaber.
I want him dead, allowing them to against me.
If she's had that thing on her for any amount of time, we've seen firsthand what it does to people's minds. And after she turns on her own men for her perception of them working with the Blood Mages, she goes anime supervillain and begins infusing lyrium into the statues around the courtyard, which actually make for some pretty cool looking golem enemies. The fight is lengthy but easy compared to the one with Corypheus. and it does end up with her sword exploding and eroding her body away. She's dead. And that's it. That's the end of the game. Now, I did run through the whole thing on the Templar side as well, and as you might have expected, it's more or less the same exact experience. With the first Enchanter, it made no sense for him to feel as cornered as he did, seeing as the champion of Kirkwall was still alive and right in front of his face, when he was on the mage's side, that is. Had Hawke been downed or thrown aside by Meredith or whatever, then I could have seen a reason for him to go through with that when he did when you sided with the mages. Now that things are reversed, it makes a lot more sense for him to feel like he needed to resort to blood magic in the end. After he fails, Meredith turns on you. Now here's the kicker. I went full bastard Hawke for this. I killed Anders and I felt like shit doing it. 3 mages surrender and I have them put to death. After the first Enchanter falls, I have Bethany killed as well. And my reward for all of this is Meredith turning on me. Which, unfortunately, does make sense due to her lyrium-addled brain. Still doesn't make me like the outcome anymore. Guess it's just another notch on the railroad that is Dragon Age 2. The only real difference is that Hawke can become the Viscount, which to me feels like it should have been its own path. In the end, Varric wraps up his tale, explaining how Hawke fought for either side. The differences between each ending amounts to 1 or 2 lines from Varric, as no matter what, the circles rise up around the world against the Chantry. Anders' mission was a success, though I imagine that the writers could have made it so that if you sided with the Templars, they were discouraged from rebelling. If you sided with the mages, your love interest leaves Kirkwall with Hawke. The Seeker who's been interrogating Varric sees Hawke as a hero, and explains that she must find him to help stop the world from catching on fire. Varric doesn't know where Hawke is, and the Seeker allows Varric to leave before reporting her findings to Liliana. And that's where the credits roll. Dragon Age 2 is a straight line of a plot. I feel like I've said that, 10 different ways by now. And the most brilliant thing that it does is trick the player into thinking that it's not during the first playthrough. There are many breakpoints where you can side with the mages or the Templars, the Qunari or the Chantry. And every time you make one of these decisions, you do see a different outcome, at least in terms of immediate reactions and dialogue. But you still play through every single main quest without locking yourself out from any of them. You deal with the dwarf who wants the black powder, you escort the Qunari mage, you get betrayed by Varric's brother in the Deep Roads, you see Hawke's mother get murdered, the Viscount's son is always murdered. The city pushes back against Meredith. Grace always turns into a pride demon at the end. You always fight both the first Enchanter and the Knight Commander. And you could say, well, Origins has those linear moments as well. Of course, nearly every game is still going to have those moments that overlap, but the issue is whether these moments are something that the player can interfere in or not. The Blight was always going to happen, with or without the Warden. The Archdemon was always going to rise and attack Ferelden. Loghain was always going to betray Kaelin. The Dalish were always going to have issues with werewolves, Orzammar was always going to struggle with coming up with a new king, the Circle was always going to have issues with the Templars, and so on. Your Warden could not have prevented these events even if they tried. But when they are put into a position where they can persuade or dissuade, fight for or against, or generally help out one side or the other, it always affected many of the game's plot points moving forward. If you look at the game as you start, you become a warden, you help people, and you fight the Archdemon, then yeah, of course, Origins is linear too. But if you look at all of the decisions that you have and the way that it affects what the game's end state looks like, the amount of choices and outcomes is staggering. Now let's look at Hawke in Dragon Age 2. Okay, the Qunari were always going to be here. The mages were always going to be oppressed by the Templars. Varric's brother was always going to betray you. Those are probably the most solid bits of story that Hawke realistically couldn't affect from starting to develop the way that they did. But then he gains a little influence. Then he builds a reputation. And soon he has his hands in nearly every key bit of political strife in the game. He's not running around a kingdom, he's in one city. The Arishok is calling on him, the Viscount is asking for his help, the captain of the guard is a close friend, the Chantry gives him direct quests. The Templars and the Circle seek him out to take care of problems. He was at the epicenter of all changes in Kirkwall, but everything happens the way that it does no matter which dialogue options you choose. Yes, you can side with the Templars or the mages at certain points, but it never really affects what happens in a meaningful way. He can't add power to the Chantry by overthrowing the Grand Cleric and replacing her with Patrice. He can't push the Arishok to take over the city. He can't stop Anders from blowing up the Chantry. He can't side with Meredith and wind up not facing her down, just as he can't choose the first Enchanter without fighting him. There's a gigantic difference between passive, big moment storytelling and active but fulfilling storytelling. Dragon Age 2 is all about the former. The player can choose and twist small outcomes, but the large set pieces are always going to happen. And the writers hinged everything on the idea that these big moments were bombastic and fun enough to watch that it wouldn't matter if the player got to affect them directly or not. But unfortunately, whether you personally think that Dragon Age 2's big story pieces were enjoyable or not, there's still a big issue in my opinion with this type of storytelling, which is that it goes against a lot of what I think an RPG is. The strongest asset that a role-playing game brings to the table is its ability to adapt to player choice. To have the world shift around what you, as a player, have chosen. Say I have Hawke adamantly choose to go after Kirkwall's Chantry and do everything to destroy them. And say the end result is, surprise, the Chantry gets destroyed. Is that a plot twist that I never foresaw coming? No, of course not, it's what I was aiming for. But I chose to mold the world in that way. I affected it in a way that someone completely different might never experience. And that's what good RPG writing is to me. When you always witness the same events unfold no matter which faction you choose, and you always watch a certain character betray you and so on and so on and so forth, you're writing an adventure game. It's the same as playing through a game like God of War or Uncharted or Grand Theft Auto, at least from a writing point of view. And you see a lot of this sensation just through the game's premise oftentimes. Yes, there's an argument for siding with both the Templars and the Mages, but the Mages are really set up to be the good guys in all of this, despite their flaws. You see this in the amount of Mage companions alone. There are no Templar companions, just as there are no Qunari, despite there being sympathetic Templars in Tal Vashoth who could have easily made it into the squad. In my opinion, the Mages are the side that the writers expected you to take, and it feels like they were almost forced to include at least one other ending, as seen by the conclusions mirroring each other in most ways. And of course there are other smaller moments where your choice doesn't really seem to matter, only furthering the idea that this is an adventure game masked as a full-blown RPG where your decisions affect the world state.
Do you have a better idea?
I can't think of anything. You'll have to manage on your own.
What if you took me to Velasco and pretended to betray me?
BioWare's Dragon Age team has gone on record stating that Dragon Age 2 was designed the way that it was specifically to respond to the criticism of Origins. And this is actually something that resonates with me personally because it's a very easy trap to fall into. Basically, when Origins released, the game was praised to hell and back, but there were a few voices out there that would paint the game's story as too predictable. Some claim that the game's formulaic writing approach hindered it from being the best that it could be. But that's just what some were saying. Others like myself loved their take on traditional fantasy writing. And even if some elements of the story could be predicted, the journey itself and all of the lore that came with it was really fun to read up on. The problem is that as a creator, it's a lot easier to get caught up on that one comment. You read 20 comments that say, "Wow, this is amazing. I'm now looking forward to the next release, and I'm gonna name my daughter after you." But then there's that one comment that says, "Wait, why are you doing this way?" And it really doesn't sit well with you. And you get inside your own head and you go, fuck, they're right. I need to change how I write my next project. Combine that with that horrible time constraint, and I think that this is why Dragon Age 2 turned out the way that it did. At least in the narrative category.
Do you ever feel like the world's getting simpler? Like everything from eating to fighting is a lot less complex than it used to be?
These guys had something really interesting and grounded, a very solid base to expand on, to explode outward from. But instead of utilizing all of that good base lore, they took a chunk of what they had, ferried it across the ocean, and built a different type of game, leaving that initial pile of gunpowder out to get soaked in the rain. Ironically, the best and most intriguing parts of Dragon Age 2 came from its Legacy DLC, where the writers built on the Wardens, the Dwarves, and the Darkspawn. And it really only causes the rest of the game to pale even further in comparison. The thing is, this could have all still worked out completely fine, honestly. So you want to take away a lot of choice when it comes to making the main character have a different personality, origin story, and so on, right? and you want to take that one predefined person instead and follow them around. Okay, sure. But why not allow the player to then choose between various factions in Kirkwall without having to dismantle everything? Why not allow Hawke to really change and shape Kirkwall to be more Chantry oriented? Or hell, even Qunari oriented? Imagine Hawke being able to help the Arishok take the city over, and then having Act 3 have to do with either keeping the city under Qunari thumb or deciding that it was a mistake and taking it back. You have several dialogues where Hawke is put forward as a potential candidate for the next Viscount. But the only way that this can happen is if he decides to blindly support the Templars. Wouldn't it have been a lot more interesting if Hawke had maintained a stance of unification and healing for the entire game, and this stance led to the possibility of becoming a Viscount that both sides agreed on? You could honestly even throw in the exact same end boss fights if you really wanted to, but with the context that Hawke went around and tried to repair relationships between these two factions for the entire game. Instead of anything that exudes an amount of player decision, you give Hawke these dialogue options where you can have him go, "No, the mages must be controlled," but then shoehorn him into this story where the leader of the Templars is one of the big bads of the game no matter what. You have these little indicators which show that maybe the Qunari are just misunderstood and are being treated with too much aggression, but then you still have to fight them. You can outright cause Anders to leave the party and never return, only for him to show up at the end and blow up the Chantry, which is the same thing that he does even if you're his best friend and or lover. A lot of people, myself included, remember Dragon Age 2 for how samey everything looked. How you were trapped in a city with a few outlying caves and coastline for the vast majority of the game. And yes, this is a huge problem for replayability, for stifling boredom in the later acts, for keeping things fresh. It's why even the Mark of the Assassin DLC is a breath of fresh air environmentally. But Dragon Age 2's repetitive environments is only a symptom of the disease that is its writing and lack of possibility for playing the role the way that you want to play it. If the game had been a bounty of meaningful interactions and decision making, if you could affect Kirkwall in a way that made its outcome completely different from 3 or 4 other people who played the game in different ways, people would only note its repetitive city walls as a footnote rather than a big ordeal. I personally had a really tough time dragging myself through this game. It's part of why it took so long for me to get this video out. I kept getting distracted, kept getting bored, and kept not feeling like working on this video. And there are plenty of reasons for that I've already went over ad nauseum. But I can't say that I hated Dragon Age 2. There are many little things that still make this game worth playing at least one time. You can't deny that there are many characters and stories that are actually quite fun to watch and interact with, to listen to and enjoy the company. A lot of the game helps to clarify how many factions work with and against each other, how they were established and how they act now. It's a good game for information, but it's a weak entry by itself. Dragon Age 2 is a stepping stone of 80% mediocrity and 20% genuine entertainment. It brings quite a bit of sweeping change to the world in preparation for future titles, whether you wanted it to or not. And while I can see the argument for its forced end state being easier to build off of, I think this really only harkens back to an age-old BioWare problem. It's hard to build multiple games where each game has branching path after branching path, where I can have 1 to 4 endings in the first game that leads into 1 to 8 endings in the second game and 1 to 16 in the third. It's hard to account for every little detail, especially when developers are pressed for time. It's hard to allow players to push the world any which way they want when you know that you can forge a better story with one outcome. But it's just as hard to be a player of a franchise that you've grown to love and watch as it goes from 4 paths to 2, from 2 paths to 1. I am still intrigued and a bit excited to see what Inquisition brings to the table. But I think that if the second entry has taught me anything, it's to temper my expectations on how I'll be able to affect Hades. Thanks for watching. I went into this thing thinking that it'd be a brief 90-minute video and came out the other end wondering how I talk so much. Guess I just like Dragon Age. Either way, I really gotta get to that new Pokemon game, so that'll be next. Until then, I've got merch over at my merch shop. I've got those Fallout stickers where the proceeds will be donated to charity, and I've also got a limited time 2022 edition of a older Christmas shirt. I've also got a Twitch where I stream nearly every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. I've got a Twitter where there's a lot of words and buttons, but I only really know how half of them work. I've got a Discord where the percentage of buttons I know about goes up, as does the general discussion of people shooting the shit. And I've got a Patreon. And that's it. Have a good one.